Chapter 772. The fire elemental plane might lack many things, but it did not lack fire. Grimm's fire elemental form shuttled through the sea of flames. With the ash boots, not only did he not lose any energy, he felt energized instead, as if he could swim for an eternity. However, the AI chip projected a blue countdown on his retina, ticking away at every second. The satisfaction and indulgence Grimm felt in the sea of flames might be real, but the AI chip's prompt was shocking. If he stayed in the sea of flames for more than an hour, he might be completely assimilated by the fire elemental energy. At that time, his soul might even deviate, and he would take an irreversible step towards becoming an elemental being. This was not part of his original plan. Once he took this step, he could only choose between being a magus or an elemental being. After becoming an elemental being, he would no longer be repelled by the fire elemental plane. Elemental beings generally had long lives, and there were no natural predators in the plane. As long as Grimm was given enough time, he was confident that he would grow into a mighty flame sovereign. However, once his soul was assimilated by the fire elemental plane, he would lose his identity as a native of the Magus world, drawing a clear line between him and his past life. His identity as a Magus was extremely important to Grimm's future growth and development. Grimm knew that the four elemental planes supported the four elemental lords of the legends. Their strength was said to be at rank 9. If he wanted to make a name for himself in the elemental plane, he would have to destroy them. From this point of view, it seemed that the Magus faction was more conducive to his growth. Grimm, who had been pondering over this for a long time, was extremely careful and tried his best to maintain his identity as a Magus in the Magus world. Within the Sea of Flames, it was impossible to determine the coordinates of the plane. Grimm stepped on the flames and quickly traversed through the Sea of Flames. When there were only 5 minutes left on the countdown, he emerged from the Sea of Flames. This was a completely unfamiliar area. Grimm actually saw a simple and unadorned village. Inside and outside the village, there was an endless stream of flaming creatures with strange bodies of flames. They looked like humans, swaying their flaming bodies and shuttling back and forth in front of the stalls in the market, as if they were looking for something. Elemental beings also had markets and goods to trade. Didn't they never have the concept of personal belongings? Grimm furrowed his brows and could not help but walk towards the market out of curiosity. This was an open public market, and there were no guards or managers at all. Those who could enter this place were all fire creatures with advanced intelligence. They were different from the muddle-headed, low-level companions that only knew how to rely on their instincts to wander around. Almost all of them had intelligence equivalent to their own strength. When Grimm turned into a fire elemental and barged in, a few high-grade flame spirits glanced at him before leaving coldly. So many level 2, so many level 3. Grimm swallowed his saliva with great difficulty. He trembled as he walked past the fiery creatures. This was the first time he was shocked by the power of the fire elemental plane. In the sorcerer world, a grade 3 sorcerer was the core of the sorcerer families. Although there were still tier 4 sorcerers above them, they were the ultimate trump cards and powerful existences that rarely interfered in the battles between low-level sorcerers. However, in the fire elemental plane, there were as many tier 1 creatures as there were hairs on a cow, and tier 2 creatures were like dogs. Even tier 3 creatures could be seen everywhere. At least in this market that was less than 30 acres wide, Grimm could count no less than 5 tier 3 fire elemental creatures. Their appearance and characteristics made it difficult for Grimm to determine their true identity. Grimm's eyes slowly swept across the market and found that most of the stalls here were tier 1 and tier 2 creatures. They did not have shops, stalls, or signboards. They just stood casually by the roadside with a few oddly shaped items in front of them that were hard to identify. Of course, the items here were all rare fire elemental treasures. There were also many unknown items that they had picked up from the corners of the fire elemental plane. Although he did not know the value of these items, the fact that they could survive in the fire elemental plane proved that they were not ordinary items. However, When Grimm's eyes wandered to the center of the market, he saw some strange creatures that should not have appeared here. Fire Demon. It was a Tier 2 fire demon with a tall and thin body. Its chest was covered with evil magic tattoos, and a demonic horn grew from the top of its head. It was a Tier 2 fire demon with a flaming cape draped over its back. It was not an elemental creature, but an abyssal demon. To be honest, the Balrog that Grimm transformed into was actually a higher form of the fire demon. At this moment, this Tier 2 fire demon was like the other fire demons, occupying a spot in the center of the market and setting up a small stall. Beside it, Grimm saw fire dwarves, fire gnomes, and other otherworldly existences. They seemed to represent a certain faction, and each of them had their own territory and were hawking their wares loudly. The whole market seemed to be very lively because of their presence. Grimm was slightly surprised, and he could not help but walk towards them. Dragon fruit, flame flower, fire agate, fire burning wood, fire essence iron, fire stone, fire essence flame essence. Grimm's fire elemental finally stopped in front of a stall. As he had just devoured a piece of flame essence, Grimm was very familiar with its aura. In this stall, there were 3 pieces of flame essence stacked together, flickering with a strange fiery light. Grimm raised his head and looked at the stall owner. It was a 7-meter-tall flame giant with a solid body. When it saw Grimm in his fire elemental form pacing back and forth in front of his stall, it opened its red burning eyes and glanced at Grimm coldly. Its strength was also at the Tier 2 level. It cannot be helped. In the elemental plane, there were too few Tier 1 elemental creatures that had high intelligence. Only those with high intelligence had a higher chance of sprouting. Little fellow, you can't give me what I want. I advise you to leave, the flame giant said in a low, muffled voice. It cannot be helped. Although Grimm was also at the Tier 2 level, his fire elemental was only 3 meters tall. In front of this flame giant, he was indeed a little fellow. It was no wonder that he was looked down upon. Big guy, didn't your elders tell you that an absolute body doesn't represent an absolute power? You still haven't told me what you want, Grimm said arrogantly. After exploring for a while, Grimm had a rough understanding of the temperament of these fire elemental creatures. To be honest, they were all straightforward and impatient. They would say whatever came to their minds, unlike humans who spoke tactfully. Hence, the flame giant's harsh tone did not mean hostility. It was just their way of expressing themselves. The flame giant lowered its body slightly, and like a huge volcano, it sniffed Grimm's body a few times. I see. You're not our comrade, but an outsider in disguise. All right then, maybe you really have what I need. Grimm's expression changed slightly. He did not expect the flame giant to still be able to sense his presence, even after he tried his best to seal it. Moreover, this detestable fellow had a loud voice. His words were like a clap of thunder, causing all the creatures in the market to turn their heads to look in his direction. I need the blood of some high-grade fire elemental creatures. It has to be at least grade 2, and the stronger the better. The flame giant seemed to be roaring as he spoke. Grimm was stunned at first, but then he understood. Blood of fire elemental creatures? The entire fire elemental plane was filled with elemental creatures. They did not even have skin or flesh, so how could they have blood? It was no wonder the flame giant was so excited after discovering that he was an outsider. Big guy, don't even think about it. How could he possibly have what you want? I think it's better for you to choose our ground fire lizard's blood. If you agree, I can use 30 kilograms of ground fire lizard's blood to exchange for your flame essence. How about it? This price is 20% higher than before. As if it did not want the material, it wanted to be snatched away by an outsider. The fire giant interrupted loudly from tens of meters away. The quality of the ground fire lizards is too poor. With their blood, my children will not be able to gain the favor of the flame giant. The flame giant roared loudly with a furious expression. Grimm was slightly startled and immediately projected the data from the AI chip in his mind. The flame giant race was one of the most common fire elemental plane creatures, and they had their own unique methods to give birth to their race. It was said that in order to awaken the spirit of a newly born flame giant, one had to offer the blood of a fire elemental creature to the flame giant race. This sort of primitive worship of ancestors was common among most fire elemental creatures. The high and mighty Lord of Flames was said to have relied on the worship of billions of fire elemental creatures to become the elemental lord that commanded the entire fire elemental plane. After quickly scanning through the information provided by the AI chip, Grimm immediately understood why the flame giant wanted the blood of powerful fire elemental creatures. Big guy, perhaps I really do have what you're talking about. Grimm chuckled, taking out a clay jar the size of a human head. The jar was sealed, and there were sealing runes flashing on it. What's this? The flame giant looked down and shook his head. No matter what you're talking about, this amount is too little. It's not enough for my children to use. Grimm did not waste any words, and used his hand to lightly wipe the jar's mouth. The light from the sealing runes gradually faded, and a strange, pungent smell wafted out. Chapter 773. Dragon's Blood? As if alarmed by the flame giant's roar, the entire market was in an uproar. Flaming creatures of all shapes and sizes gathered around, continuously sniffing and sensing the strange dragon aura in the air. Grimm waved his hand, and under the pressure of the powerful fire power, a miniature fire dragon drilled out of the jar. It circled in the air and spat out a thin stream of flames before slowly dispersing. It's Fire Dragon's blood. It's rank 2 Fire Dragon's blood. There were a few amongst the spectating flaming creatures who knew their stuff, and their words were filled with unconcealable joy. While the flame giant's face was filled with ecstasy, the fire devil's expression suddenly turned ugly. Trade? I'll trade. The flame giant raised his hand, and a large ring of fire enveloped him and Grimm. Hey, little fella, I'm Monsieur. How do you intend to trade with me? Grimm scanned his surroundings. With the help of the AI chip, he discovered that this ring of fire had the ability to both defend and isolate information from the outside world. He couldn't help but admire the control these fire creatures had over their skills. Every single one of them had reached perfection. I have 5 kilograms of fire dragon's blood here, and it's pure rank 2 fire dragon's blood. The joy in the flame giant's fiery eyes became even more intense. Out of all the fire elemental creatures, fire dragons were undoubtedly the oldest and most experienced. There were few magic creatures that had fire aura in their blood that could compare to fire dragons. If he sacrificed fire dragon's blood during the awakening ceremony of his descendants, the flame giant Monsieur could guarantee that his children would obtain 1 or 2 decent fire innate talents. One had to know that no matter how powerful a flame giant was, there was a certain chance that its offspring would fail to awaken a new flame giant. If they failed, their bloodline would disappear, and they would devolve into ordinary fire elemental spirits. However, if they used the fire dragon's blood, the chances of failure would be reduced to a small one, and they might even obtain some decent fire innate talents from their ancestor. Hence, the flame giant Monsieur, who had been indifferent as usual, became anxious, afraid that something might happen to this trade. Grimm hesitated for a moment, and finally gave a good price. 1 flame essence for 500 G of fire dragon blood. Flame giant Monsieur rubbed his hands regretfully. Although this price did not meet his expectations, it was still a worthwhile deal. It must be known that although flame essence was precious, as long as one had the patience to collect it, they would always be able to find some in those fiery lands. Moreover, for pure fire creatures like them, the flame essence's effect on them was definitely not as obvious as that of the outsiders. But fire dragon blood was different. Both of them might be level 2 fire-type materials, but due to the scarcity of the latter, the value of fire dragon blood in the fire elemental plane was definitely far above that of flame essence. Hence, Monsieur was satisfied with the price offered by the human magus. After that, the two of them exchanged their items in a friendly manner and put away their spoils of war in satisfaction. Taking advantage of the time when the ring of fire had yet to dissipate, the flame giant Monsieur suddenly reminded him, "You must be the human magus from the magus world. Little guy, be careful. There are many fellows looking for you nearby. After you leave the market, remember to run faster. Of course, if you encounter any trouble, you can come to my clan to seek protection. Remember, my clan's encampment is at. Grim's heart skipped a beat. Although Grim had been worried that he would fall into an enemy's trap after sneaking into the fire elemental plane, it was all just a guess. There was no way to confirm it. Now, after hearing the flame giant's words, Grim had confirmed his guess for the first time. The mission to assassinate the Flame Lord was indeed a trap. If he went straight to the Flame Lord's territory as promised, what awaited him would definitely be an entire Flame Legion. Grim sighed and could not help but worry about the latter half of his journey. After the ring of fire disappeared, Flame Giant Monsieur nodded at Grim and strode out of the flame market, heading towards the encampment of his clan. Grim was surrounded by a group of fire creatures that had been waiting for a long time. Among them, there was no lack of frightening level 3 fire creatures. Human, do you still have a fire dragon's blood? An abnormally large lava giant pushed the crowd aside and asked loudly. This lava giant had the strength of a grade 3 magma giant. Its entire body was composed of crimson lava and raging flames. It was over 10 meters tall, and when it walked, it gave off loud, thumping sounds. Ordinary small creatures could not even stand within 20 meters of it. I still have 1 kilogram. Grim did not hide anything from the group of fire creatures that were eyeing him covetously. Although fire creatures were tyrannical and would easily start a fight, they had an incomprehensible adherence to the rules of trading. Even if they were impatient, and even if this level 3 lava giant was far stronger than the flame giant, it would not interfere before the trade was completed. In this aspect, fire creatures valued the sacred rules of trading more than most intelligent creatures. At the very least, in this flame market, it was impossible to see people forcefully buying or robbing. 2 kilograms. All right, although it's a little, it's still enough. The lava giant mumbled helplessly. Little fellow, take a look at this. Do you need it? The lava giant inserted the magma surging hand into its body and pulled out a 2-meter-long fire stick from inside. Grim looked at it carefully, and the AI chip quickly recognized its essence based on the information it had gathered. Flaming coral lava staff. This was an elemental staff that could greatly increase the power of fire element spellcasters. As its entire body was made of flaming coral lava, its sturdiness was comparable to some heavy weapons. In close combat, it was a good choice to use it to smash people. According to the AI chip scan, this flaming coral lava staff could increase one's power by 15 to 25%, which was not bad at all. Grim pondered for a moment and finally shook his head. The lava giant wasn't discouraged. It chuckled and returned the flaming coral staff to its body. It then took out a handful of grade 2 fire core crystals. A rough count showed that there were at least 5 of them. This time, Grim shook his head even faster. Although grade 2 crystal cores were precious, as long as he was still in the fire elemental plane, he would have plenty of time to slowly collect them. There was no need to use the precious fire dragon's blood to exchange for them. It seemed that the stock in its hands was about to be emptied, and the lava giant became a little anxious. For the 3rd time, it took out a lava amulet from its pocket. Little fellow, this is a lava talisman that has my soul aura etched on it. With this talisman, you can summon my soul projection to fight for you. A lava talisman can only summon a soul projection once, and it can last for 15 minutes. The strength of the soul projection is at the initial rank of 3. This should be enough to exchange for your remaining dragon blood. Grim's eyes lit up, and he said loudly, 2 lava talismans. I want to exchange for 2 lava talismans. The lava giant laughed strangely. Human Magus, don't be too greedy. Your fire dragon's blood is at most a grade 2 material, but my lava talisman is a grade 3 item. Without any hesitation, Grim took out another clay pot from his pocket. 2 caddies for 2 of your amulets. That's a fair deal, right? The lava giant was stunned at first, and then shook its head and laughed. You outsiders are always so cunning and greedy. All right, I'll exchange for 2. After saying this, The lava giant took out a flint from its body and formed it into the shape of a talisman. It then blew a wisp of pure golden flames into it. In a short while, a new lava talisman was created. After handing the 2 genes of Fire Dragon's blood to the lava giant, Grimm used the AI chip to scan the 2 heavy lava talismans. Beep discovered 2 strange soul imprints. Initial speculation is that they are soul projection tools. The talisman weighs 17 gene, and the strength of the soul projection is 825 degrees. With this talisman, you can temporarily summon a weakened lava giant to fight for you. Duration, 15 minutes. Soul rank, initial grade 3, a grade 3 tool. This was a genuine grade 3 tool. Though it was a one-time use and only lasted for 15 minutes, initial grade 3 lava giant soul projection was enough to help Grimm do many things. For example, killing a certain annoying Lord of the Flames with a single slap. Having obtained what it needed, the lava giant did not hesitate to leave the Flame Bazaar. Faced with the rest of the flaming creatures, Grimm could only regretfully express that he no longer had any Fire Dragon's blood. Only then did the crowd disperse unwillingly. Just as Grimm was about to leave the Flame Bazaar, he suddenly heard the hoarse voice of the fire demon. "Hey, human magus, do you want to make a deal with me?" Grimm stopped his tracks and slowly turned around to look at the abyss demon wrapped in flames. "What can you give me? What do you want from me?" The fire demon's attitude was extremely cordial. "Human magus, don't be so guarded. You should know that we came to this remote and desolate place for the rare flaming materials. It's rare to meet a friend from the magus world. Why don't we make use of this opportunity to exchange what we need?" Grimm hesitated for a moment, but he finally forced away the steaming flames that covered his face and revealed his face. He said arrogantly, "Let me introduce myself. I'm Grimm from the magus world. I'm the leader of the Scarlet family in the Terran region." Chapter 774. His conversation with the infernal devil Kazod was pleasant and relaxed. When Grimm's flaming figure disappeared from the market, a sinister sneer appeared on blazing demon Kazod's dark red face. "My lord, do you think we should send someone to follow him?" Without a sound, a hazy human figure appeared beside the infernal devil. It looked like a short child about a meter tall, but its illusory body gave off a sinister and terrifying feeling. Fire Assassin. This was a strange creature that was half demon and half elemental. In the fire elemental plane, it was a foreign hybrid that was not recognized by the natives. As they were proficient in stealth and assassination, they were rather nimble. Hence, they were often recruited by powerful existences to act as assassins. There's no need for that. He's now a hot target in the fire elemental plane. There's no need for us to participate in the personal hunting activities of those stupid lords. It's just a bounty from a rank 2 lesser lord. It's not worth it to offend a rank 2 magus. So we're not going to do anything? That won't do. We still have to take the bounty from the lesser lord. Anyway, as long as we provide the whereabouts of that magus, we'll get a third of the reward. It'd be a waste if we didn't take it. Go. Quickly tell the subordinates of the lesser lord that a human magus has appeared in the Gaba Bazaar. Tell them that we can provide a magic portrait of that human magus and see what price they're willing to pay. Hee, this kind of risk-free income is what we should be doing. We're merchants now. Shortly after, the sinister laughter of the infernal devil Kazod sounded in the bazaar. The Hokage assassin, who has always acted sinisterly, shuddered and quickly hid his figure and left in a hurry. After leaving the bazaar, Grimm dived into the sea of flames. Grimm used the AI chip to record all the information on the map of the fire elemental plane that the infernal devil had given him, and then discarded it. According to the AI chip's analysis, the sheepskin scroll had at least 3 obscure methods of locating items. If Grimm carried it with him, his movements would be completely in the hands of his enemies. This map was rather crude. On it, there were only some general descriptions of the names of the places and the geographical locations of the mountains and rivers. Of course, this was also related to the laziness of elemental creatures. Ever since they were born, they roamed the entire fire elemental plane aimlessly, never caring about their location or what was around them. That was why they were too lazy to name these places, and it was even more impossible for them to draw detailed maps. Therefore, according to this map, Grimm only knew that the market was called the GABA market and that it was a small local public market. The rest of the information was quite vague. Inside the fire elemental plane, one could see a sea of fire that stretched for hundreds to tens of thousands of miles. Apart from the raging flames, there was nothing else in the sea of fire. Even most fire creatures could not survive in it for a long time. Only in the gaps between the sea of fire and the sea of fire could it be possible to condense some strange landforms and landforms. The land, hills, plains, and volcanoes that had a fixed shape were the most common places for fire creatures to gather. Many powerful fire creatures occupied places with dense fire elements, treating those places as their homes or lairs. As such, they formed their own territories that were completely irregular. After comparing the coordinates of the fire elemental plane to the rough map, Grimm finally confirmed that the flame lord he needed to assassinate lived in a special fire terrain called Fiery Dust Canyon. That place was 50,000 miles away from his current position. At his normal speed, it would take him at least a month to reach there. Through various channels, Grimm could clearly sense that he was now trapped in a huge storm. It was as if there was an inescapable net waiting for him to crawl into it. Faced with this situation, Grimm could only slow down his advance. He turned towards another direction and found a relatively cold place to digest the flame spirits. With the vastness of the fire elemental plane, a Tier 2 flame lord like Arthez did not have the ability to monitor an area of tens of thousands of square kilometers. Strictly speaking, Arthez's sphere of influence was almost empty outside of Fiery Dust Canyon. If he wanted his undisciplined fire elemental subordinates to build an intelligence network to monitor the surrounding area, they would not be able to do such a detailed job. As such, once Grimm left the GABA Bazaar and washed away his traces with the Sea of Fire, he hid in a secluded place. Arthez would not be able to find any traces of Grimm even if he sent all his subordinates to dig 3 feet deep into the ground. Due to the absence of the main character, the once bustling activity of offering a bounty slowly cooled down. Wizard World, Crimson Throne. At this moment, the lava hall hidden deep underground was filled with the private army of nobles. These people had brought a large number of craftsmen and slave soldiers from afar, using the inexhaustible wood to create batches of siege weapons. Now, they were using these siege weapons to advance toward the tall wizard's pagoda in the center of the hall. However, their advance was extremely difficult, as there was an even more powerful magic weapon army blocking their way. The battle between the two sides had lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. The private army of the nobles had sent out a large number of cannon fodder, raising thick wooden shields high and slowly advancing toward the wizard's pagoda while chanting slogans. Behind them were the heavily armored infantry that the nobles had spent large amounts of money to build. These heavily armored infantrymen were all wearing enchanted heavy armor that was 2 fingers thick. There were almost no gaps or cracks on the front of the armor, and even the cylindrical steel helmet on their faces only had a tiny cross-shaped gap. As the elite troops of the private army of the nobles, these heavily armored infantry were generally equipped with heavy weapons such as spiked hammers, flails, and double-sided battle axes. They formed a row of 10 people, crowding together. From afar, they looked like a group of iron walls that could move freely. Behind them, there were archers dressed in simple leather armor, carrying longbows and short axes on their backs. They were not the normal arrangement of the private army of the nobles, but rather hunters and mercenaries that had been recruited temporarily. Logically speaking, this kind of arrangement should have been enough for them to kill most of the enemies. Unfortunately, when they were not facing the human army, they were the ones being slaughtered and ravaged. In front of the wizard's pagoda, about 103-meter-tall metal magic weapons formed a loose defensive line, using the violent magic rifles in their hands to fire metal bullets at the approaching private army of the nobles. In front of the battle formation, there were more than 20 spider-shaped mechanical puppet beasts waiting in formation. Each of them was 5 meters tall, with a spindle-shaped spider body, raised spider head, and giant pincers made of complex alloy that shone with a magical luster. Around the metal body were 4 pairs of dark and deep metal joints, the ends of which were as sharp as blades. When they crawled forward quickly, a light stab would leave a triangular hole in the hard lava slab. The main attack weapon of this spider-shaped mechanical puppet beast was actually a pair of giant Calypso-shaped chainsaws installed on the front of its body. When it smashed aside the wooden shields in front of it, its metal limbs moving as it charged into the crowd, the 2 enormous Calypso-shaped chainsaws released ear-piercing rumbling noises, producing dazzling sparks between flesh and steel. In front of the spider-shaped mechanical puppet beasts, ordinary human infantrymen did not even have a chance to resist and would be cut in half at the waist, dying a miserable death. Heavy infantrymen wearing thick armor might be able to resist in front of them for a while, then gather around them and use the heavy weapons in their hands to smash the metal shell with all their might. As long as they had enough strength and the weapon was hard enough, there was a certain chance that the magical machinery inside the mechanical puppet beast body would be destroyed, causing it to lose its ability to fight. But every time this happened, it was also the time when the mechanical puppet beast would spit out crimson red flames from its mouth. Due to the density of the enemies and the fact that it was difficult for the heavy infantrymen to dodge, every time the mechanical puppet beast was surrounded while spitting out flames and striding forward, the terrifying scene of human bodies being roasted and heated iron cans being heated was simply unbearable to look at. The flames spat out by the mechanical puppet beasts were alchemy flames with temperatures as high as 1 to 2,000 degrees, which could directly turn a human body into charred bones upon contact. As for those heavy infantrymen, their clothes were ignited by the surging waves of flames, and even the iron plates outside their bodies were heated to a blazing red. In this chaotic battlefield, there were no slave soldiers to help them take off their armor that had already been burnt to a crimson red. These heavy infantrymen were burned to the point that their flesh was lacerated amidst waves of cries and howls, and black smoke was rising from the inside of their armor. Faced with such a miserable scene, all the nobles holding the line at the back were so shocked that their faces turned pale. One by one, they turned their gazes to the wizards sitting comfortably at the back of the troops. Under the approval of the high-grade wizards, official wizards led numerous sorcerer apprentices and quietly approached the mechanical puppet beasts that were wantonly slaughtering the mechanical puppet beasts. Following the explosion of concentrated sorcery, 20 to 30 apprentice-level sorcery, combined with 2 to 3 sorcerer-level sorcery, was enough to overturn the mechanical puppet beasts one by one. Although the surface of the mechanical puppet beasts was plated with a layer of anti-magic metal, following the eruption of the battle, just now, it was inevitable that a certain degree of damage had appeared. Now that they were being concentrated and saturated by the sorcerers and apprentices, they were naturally defeated one by one. Chapter 775. The wreckage of the magical machinery on the battlefield was also a huge obstacle. In order not to affect the follow-up attack, the attacking side had to send out a large number of pack animals to drag away the metal wreckage that was still emitting black smoke. Even though there was still a fierce battle ahead, and the magical machinery army could not shift their attention to the unarmed and unprotected servants, the stray bullets that crossed the battlefield still brought them great damage. The metal bullets the size of pigeon eggs would create dazzling sparks when they hit the walls of the lava, leaving small holes or deep scratches on the ground. If it hit a pack animal or a mortal, it would directly penetrate through, leaving a huge radioactive wound at the spot where it was hit. The 3 days of tug-of-war had brought great casualties to both sides. Since the start of the battle, the private army of the nobles had lost more than 2,000 people, and the lowly servant army had lost more than 3,000. The Crimson family had paid the heavy price of more than 70 magical machinery being destroyed. In the eyes of the Magi, this kind of loss was definitely worth it. A wizard-level metal magical machinery was worth more than 1,000 magic crystals. The Crimson family had lost 70 magical machinery, which meant that they had lost more than 70,000 magic crystals. In comparison, the casualties of the private army of the nobles and the servant army were insignificant. Being able to use the lowly army of mortals to deplete the Crimson family's magical machinery reserve was extremely beneficial to the wizards. At least, it greatly reduced the possibility of retaliation when the wizards attacked the Wizard's Pagoda. The attack of a single metal magical machinery might not be able to threaten the official wizards, but if they were to gather and focus fire, even the defensive spells of level 2 wizards would not be able to withstand such a powerful attack. Especially when a magical machinery army worked together with the Crimson Wizards, it would be a great threat to the subsequent wizards' attack. Because of this, the wizards were more than willing to use the casualties of the mortal army in exchange for the rapid reduction of the magical machinery army. Even though there were reports that the Crimson family had conquered a known dimension with rich metal mines, it was still wishful thinking to think that they could build an inexhaustible magical machinery army. After all, the core components of high-level magical machinery needed to be activated using the magical activation spell. This was not something that mortal craftsmen or gnome technicians could master. Thus, the Wizards of the Alliance were confident that they could use the private army of 30,000 nobles to deplete the Crimson family's magical machinery reserves, paving the way for the subsequent attack on the Wizard's Pagoda. Under such guidance, even without the supervision of high-grade wizards, the pale-faced nobles were already shouting themselves hoarse to organize the next attack. A few of the more powerful private armies of the nobles had already been depleted in the first few assaults. The next few assaults were mostly made up of the various nobles' elites. Every time the attacks they organized got close to the Wizard's Pagoda, they would be met with the powerful counterattack of the Wizard's Pagoda's defense system. Bursting fireballs with long tails of black smoke shot out of the Wizard's Pagoda, plowing through the entire front line of the battle of the nobles' private army. Amidst the violent flame shockwaves and the deafening roars of the fireballs, the nobles' private army crumbled like a castle on the beach. Luckily, the Crimson family wizards were at an absolute disadvantage in terms of numbers, and did not dare leave the protection of the Wizard's Pagoda to give chase. Otherwise, the nobles' private army would not have the confidence and courage to regroup and launch another counterattack. But no matter how intense the battle at the front line, no matter how heavy the casualties of the mortal army, the few wizard leaders still sat in the large tent at the back, unmoved, silently waiting for the good news from the small team of wizards. Finally, on the fourth day of the battle, a violent tremor came from beneath their feet. The lava wells scattered all over the lava hall spewed out scorching hot lava at the same time, followed by a loud rumble that echoed throughout the land. The volcano is about to erupt. This place is going to collapse. Let's run quickly. Just as the warriors on the battlefield were scared out of their wits, fleeing in all directions, the Wizards of the Alliance who had been waiting for news all this time revealed expressions of surprise. Success. They had indeed succeeded. The sea of lava beneath the lava hall did not continue to rise like before, wiping out the attackers in one fell swoop. Instead, after a series of violent tremors, it started to shake and ripple continuously. The originally deep and reserved sea of lava was like a little girl with a bad temper, wantonly releasing its terrifying destructive power. It even affected the Crimson Throne's Wizard's Pagoda's ability to absorb fire energy. Back then, one of the main reasons why Grimm had chosen to set up the Wizard's Pagoda here was that the sea of lava below was a decent source of energy, able to provide the Wizard's Pagoda with an endless supply of powerful fire element energy. But now that the sea of lava was rioting, not only was the Crimson Throne unable to absorb fire energy from within, it even had to expend its energy reserves to quell the effects of the rioting. This indirectly weakened the offensive and defensive capabilities of the Wizard's Pagoda. The level 3 Wizard Yurga, who had been quietly waiting for news from the small team of fire wizards, stood up from his chair with a face full of joy. He looked at the wizards of the various families around him and said excitedly, Everyone, the team of fire wizards we sent out has successfully destroyed the enemy's source of energy. Now that the enemy has lost control of the sea of lava, the thing we were most worried about will not happen again. Next, the attack on the wizard's pagoda will begin immediately. We cannot give the enemy a chance to rest and adjust. Wizard Gent, you will lead the wizards of the Undull family in charge of the first round of attacks. Wizard Huaimu, you will lead the wizards of the Senna's family in charge of the second round. Dean Gill, you will lead the wizards of the Leighton Academy in charge of the third round. Wizard Roy. Yurga's gaze swept around before landing on Roy, who had a somewhat cold expression on his face. The demonic forest hut will be in charge of providing protection and reinforcements. After the third round, the Kamara family will attempt to launch an all-out attack and see how much of the defense of the Wizard's Pagoda is left. All right, that's all the orders. Now, everyone, split up and take action. With the reputation of the level 3 Crow of Death, no wizard dared to question Yurga's decision to his face. All the level 2 wizards whose names were called could only nod their heads solemnly in agreement, and hurriedly left to prepare for the attack. The battle had already gone on for so long, and the Crimson family's battle power had been greatly depleted. They should be able to disrupt the rhythm of the Wizard's Pagoda's defense by launching an attack, while the energy system of the opponent's pagoda was still in chaos. With a strong sense of confidence, the Wizards of the Alliance, who had been hiding at the back, finally stepped onto the battlefield. When fighting against the Wizard's Pagoda, they could either break through its defense system in one go with a violent attack that exceeded the total defensive power of the Wizard's Pagoda, or they could prepare for a prolonged battle, using a continuous stream of saturated attacks to suppress the Wizard's Pagoda's defense system, causing it to overdraft its internal energy and reduce the Wizard's retaliation against the Wizard's Pagoda. No matter which option it was, it meant that the power of the Wizard's Pagoda was terrifying. If not for the fact that the Alliance had found a way to cut off the energy source of the Flame Monarch's pagoda, they might not have the confidence to take down a small wizard's pagoda that was well-equipped and guarded by powerful wizards. The Undull family, who was in charge of the first round of attacks, did not just send the wizards of the family. Instead, they mobilized the private army of nobles under their command, ordering them to launch the most ferocious attack. As for the wizards of the family, they were hidden within the private army, waiting for an opportunity to attack the five-floored wizard's pagoda. After the previous rounds of attrition, the Undull family's private army of nobles had suffered heavy losses. Their initial number of over 7,000 had dropped to just over 4,000. However, the magic machinery army of the Crimson family had also been reduced from a team of 100 at its peak to less than 30. Thus, the two level 2 wizards of the Undull family focused their first round of attacks on the remaining 30 magic machinery. As long as they could get rid of these obstacles in their way, the next few rounds of attacks would be able to directly attack the Wizard's Pagoda. Within the Wizard's Pagoda, the Crimson Butler Gargamel was extremely busy at this moment. The alarm that came from the energy room beneath the Wizard's Pagoda shocked him. However, before he could figure out why the elemental altar had lost its effectiveness, the Wizards of the Alliance, who had been lying low for a long time, began to move. Looking at the Undull family's wizards, who were slowly advancing with a private army of nobles, Gargamel's expression turned serious once again. "Lady Mary, what do you think we should do now?" Gargamel, who had no idea what to do, could only hurriedly ask the wizard in charge, Mary. "What's there to worry about?" Mary still had a nonchalant expression. "You stay in the pagoda and continue dealing with the energy room. I'll bring a few people out to hold them off for a while. We have to conserve the energy reserves of the Wizard's Pagoda, so we don't have to actively attack the enemy. We just need to cast some basic defensive spells." Saying this, she waved her hand to summon 2 Blood Knights and 2 Blood Elves, intending to initiate the battle. Dragonman Zacha was indeed the most loyal of servants. Even though Mary did not call out his name, he was the first to step forward. "Lady Mary, bring me along for this battle." Mary thought for a moment, then slowly shook her head. "Don't be in a hurry to fight. The enemy's attack this time will be a protracted battle. We have to be prepared for a long fight." The blood tribe members I brought all have the ability to absorb blood to recover. Their battle power will not be reduced by too much if the battle drags on. Thus, let us hold them off for a few more rounds. You and Tigul are both made of flesh and blood. It's best if you choose to save the situation when the enemy's level 3 wizards enter the battlefield. Otherwise, we don't have absolute confidence that we can successfully escape back to the wizard's pagoda under the attack of the level 3 wizards. So, keep a close eye on those 2 level 3 wizards. Chapter 776. The Undul Family. They were a medium-sized family with a small reputation in the scattered Tower Forest area, known for producing blood wizards. Their main bloodline was a powerful creature from another world called the Bloodmouths. When they blended in with the noble's private army and advanced toward the wizard's pagoda, the door of the wizard's pagoda suddenly opened, and a large group of metal magical machines swarmed out. There were also strange men and women wearing metal armor or light leather armor among them. It was Mary and her blood breeds. The Undul family had sent 2 level 2 wizards to lead the team. Gent, a level 2 blood wizard. Golden, a level 2 body tempering wizard. As for the other level 1 wizards, there were 21 of them. Seeing Mary and her blood breeds enter the fray, the wizards of the Undul family could not help but raise their vigilance, silently waiting for the battle to erupt. The first to start the battle was naturally the peripheral forces of both sides. 63 metal magic machinery versus the 2,000 private soldiers of the Undul family. As soon as the 2 sides came into contact, it was a fight to the death. One had to admit that the private army of the Undul family was also an elite and valiant army. Faced with the defense line of arcane machines that was as indestructible as the great wall of iron and the storm of metal that was shooting at them like a storm, their confidence and courage were not destroyed. Instead, they completely burst out in miserable, twisted screams and roars. The first to collide were naturally the spider-type mechanical puppet beasts and the heavily armored soldiers of the nobles. Amidst the ear-piercing roars of metal chainsaws madly cutting wooden shields, the 7 mechanical golem beasts were like metal monsters that only knew how to kill, barging straight into the densely arranged formation of the nobles. 2 large Kelliser-like metal chainsaws spun along with the mechanical puppet beast's body, drawing streaks of blood-colored arcs through the sturdy and dense armor and flesh around it. The heavy shield warriors surrounding the metal beast were stunned to discover that smooth and neat scratches had unexpectedly appeared on their thick steel armor. A moment later, streaks of dark red blood swam out from the scratches. Immediately after, it became a fountain of blood that could not be suppressed. Asterisk crash. Asterisk a dozen or so fighters were sliced in half at the waist by the metal monster's frenzied attacks. In an instant, they were reduced to chunks of flesh and blood. Their thick steel armor had already been broken and distorted by the terrifying power of the metal monsters. Their counterattacks, whether it was the sharp swords or the heavy axes, could only create sparks on the smooth surface of the metal shell of the mechanical puppet beasts, leaving scratches of varying depths. These scratches looked dense and terrifying, but they were unable to stop the other party from continuing to kill. For these mechanical puppet beasts with metal shells, sharp weapons were the least of their fears. A low horn sounded from the back of the noble team. The fighters surrounding the mechanical golem did their utmost to shrink their formation. Using their sturdy wooden shields and thick steel armors, they squeezed the mechanical golem's space of movement. Some of the stronger people wielding mace, flail, and other heavy weapons rushed forward, using all their strength to smash the metal shell of the mechanical golem. The more intricate a mechanical construct was, the more it could not withstand the impact and vibrations. After a few rounds of smashing and smashing, a few of the mechanical puppet beasts let out ear-piercing noises of metal rubbing against each other. A moment later, thick black smoke rose from various parts of their bodies, and they finally fell to the ground amidst the clanging sounds of hammering. In the process, to destroy a mechanical puppet beast, the nobles often had to pay the price of 100 to 200 lives. Furthermore, With the mechanical puppet beasts blocking the noble's advance, the archer magic weapons entrenched at the back were able to fire at full force without any interference. Metal bullets rained down on the enemy's battle line over and over again. After all, there were only a few in the noble's private army who could wear full armor. Most of them were still ordinary warriors who wore half-body armor or leather armor. This kind of team might be able to display decent combat power in a battle between nobles, but in a battle between wizards, they could only be cheap cannon fodder. 56 archer magic weapons maintained a relatively loose formation, occupying a certain area in front of the wizard's pagoda. They used the dense metal bullets to beat the noble's private army into a sorry state. When a pigeon egg-sized metal bullet hit a wooden shield, it would leave a tiny hole. When it hit a rock wall, it would leave a string of dazzling sparks. When it hit a human body, it would often penetrate through many warriors' bodies in one breath, leaving behind countless wounded people who were screaming in pain and agony. Let's get rid of the strong ones at the front first. Let these warriors attack the magic machine team at the back. Wizard Gint quickly communicated with another rank 2 wizard, Gulit, who was hiding in the crowd. Gulit slightly nodded. He was the first to unleash his full strength. As a wizard who was a body-tempering wizard, Gulit did not rely on powerful spells like elemental wizards. Instead, he chose to use his mind and spells to strengthen his body. He was wearing a full set of golden leather armor, with a long, narrow battle blade in his hand. He strode towards the nearest mechanical golem with a majestic gait. The automaton golem seemed to have sensed the threat he posed. It spun its metal chainsaws around it, forcing the fighters around away. Clang, clang, clang. Its 8 metallic limbs clanged as it charged towards Gulit. Both sides were closing in on each other quickly. When the distance between the two was less than 5 meters, the mechanical marionette raised its head and spat out a huge pillar of fire that was half a meter thick from its metal mouth, engulfing the anatomy refinery sorcerer's body with an earth-shattering force. Mary, who was sneaking towards the front line, suddenly stopped. She hid under the shadow of a mechanical golem, silently observing the sudden battle from afar. The flames the mechanical golem spat out were mixed with a large amount of alchemy potions. The highest temperature could reach a shocking 1,700 degrees, and it had an extremely strong adhesion. It was a pity that such an attack was still too weak for a rank 2 magus. A low growl came from within the sea of fire. Gullit's lean body broke through the surging flames and quickly appeared in front of the mechanical golem. Without waiting for the mechanical golem's 2 Calicera-like chainsaws to close in, his body was accompanied by a dazzling blade light as he soared into the sky. With a flick of his finger, the mechanical golem's 2 Calicera-like limbs and a spider head quietly slid off in front of everyone's eyes. The cross-section of the wound was smooth and flat, showing the sharpness of Gullit's blade-like weapon. Without the spider head, the mechanical golem also lost its perception of the battlefield and the ability to receive battle commands from a distance. Without the metal chainsaw, it lost one of its most important offensive abilities. All that was left was a large metal shell, and it could only desperately wave its 8 sharp and thick limbs, barging through the crowd. The warriors who had just retreated swarmed up again, using their wooden shields to block the mechanical golem's incessant stabs. They used their thick war hammers or heavy flails to smash the mechanical golem's metal shell. After a series of heavy blows, the mechanical golem's body finally emitted an ear-piercing screech of metal friction. Under the siege of the crowd, it slowly collapsed. However, before it died, the mechanical golem's sharp limbs still pierced through the armor and bodies of 3 human warriors, stringing them together like candied fruits on a stick. Finally, the mechanical golem fell silent. As a level 2 physique refinement wizard, Gulit had already refined his body into some kind of special weapon. The toughness and strength of his muscles and bones were comparable to that of an elementary level 2 defensive tool. As a level 2 physique refinement wizard, Gulit had already refined his body into some kind of special weapon. The toughness and strength of his muscles and bones were comparable to that of an elementary level 2 defensive tool. Thus, when the battle started, his fists met flesh, and his blade drew blood. In almost an instant, the 3 mechanical golem were killed on the spot. Almost in the blink of an eye, the surface of Gen's body was covered with a layer of strange, dark scales. His body also quickly transformed into a fat fish with a wide, ferocious mouth. His 2 forearms turned into 2 powerful fins, supporting the fat body at both ends of his body. His 2 hind legs were twisted together to form a fat fishtail, which was also densely covered with black scales. Almost in the blink of an eye, Gen's body was covered with a layer of strange, dark scales. His body quickly transformed into a fat fish with a wide, ferocious mouth. His 2 forearms turned into 2 powerful fins, supporting the fat body at both ends of his body. Only then did he have the ability to move his fat body. His 2 hind legs twisted together to form a fat fishtail, which was also densely covered with black fish scales. This was a strange monster called the Bloodmaw. It had the ability to move both on land and water. However, its main weapon of attack was still the terrifying mouth at the front of its body, which could almost be opened to the extreme. The mouth was densely covered with dense, sharp, jagged teeth. Being bitten by such a large mouth, the terrible lacerations would be enough to instantly break the bones of anyone. Moreover, its terrifying mouth went straight into the bottomless stomach. Any living creature that was swallowed by it would instantly suffer from the combination of strong acid and tearing. Such a terrifying monster like the Bloodmaw could even swallow and digest a mechanical golem that was twice its size. From this, one could see just how terrifying its stomach was. Although the Crimson Throne Wizard Pagoda still had some magical equipment in reserve, it could not allow 2 Grade 2 Magi to trample on the battlefield so easily. Mary shouted in a low voice, "You two take care of the anatomy, refinement wizard. Leave this ugly fish to me." After a quick and simple assignment, Mary turned into a bolt of crimson lightning, quickly approaching the Grade 2 wizard Gent who had transformed into the Bloodmaw. The 2 Blood Knights behind her, Soros and Winsole, turned around and rushed toward the other Grade 2 anatomy refinement wizard, Gullit, who was on a killing spree. The bloody mouth that Gent had transformed into had just torn apart a mechanical golem into a pile of spare parts, and the other party's desperate counterattack of the metal chainsaw cut through the fine fish scales on the surface of his body, causing sparks to fly everywhere, but it was unable to damage him at all. The demonic fish opened its bloody mouth wide and bit off the mechanical golem's metal limb that was as thick as an adult's waist. Then, it held the metal spider's leg in its mouth and chewed it off as if it was eating a sugar cane, swallowing it down with a crunching sound. Chapter 777. As a bloodline sorcerer, after transforming into the bloody mouth, Gent was almost fearless. If Mary was an elemental sorcerer, Gent would be a little worried that she would be kite and slowly killed by long-range spells. However, Gent was not afraid of a vampire who specialized in agility. The weak attacks of vampires were well known in the world. It was simply wishful thinking for Mary to think that her sharp claws could break through the fine scales on the surface of the bloody mouth. Without the ability to cause damage, the vampire's ability to absorb blood and regenerate was also useless. If Mary was careless and got bitten by the bloody mouth, with the terrifying mouth of the bloody mouth, she would not be able to escape the fate of being bitten in half, no matter how strong her defensive spells were. Therefore, seeing Mary approaching, not only did Gent not retreat, but he also laughed sinisterly and swayed his fat body, rushing towards Mary like a bloody mouth that could not move. If there were any flaws in the bloody mouth, it would be that it did not have many long-range skills, and its movement speed was also a little slow among Grade 2 groups. However, its super strong defensive scales and terrifying mouth that could swallow anything made up for most of its flaws, making it a fierce monster that no one dared to provoke. As soon as Mary got close to the bloody mouth, she began to quickly swim around it, constantly using her bloody claws to frequently probe its body's weaknesses. Towards Mary's attacks, the bloody mouth did not care at all. It used the scales on the surface of its body to block all the attacks, and it also constantly circled around, trying to bring Mary's body into the attack range of its large mouth. In fact, most of Mary's attacks carried two different effects: blood erosion and shadow damage. However, against the bloody mouth that was covered in heavy armor, it was very difficult for Mary's attacks to penetrate the magic scales and cause visible damage to it. Moreover, the bloody mouth's attacks were a little clumsy. It tried its best to bite Mary's ghostly figure, but it was almost impossible to catch her position. Occasionally, it would pounce on her, but it would quickly find out that it was just an afterimage that Mary had deliberately released to lure the bloody mouth into attacking. Mary attacked around the bloody mouth for 3 minutes, but soon became a little discouraged. This fat, bloody mouth demonic fish's body was densely covered with magic scales, and it was very difficult for Mary's attacks to penetrate it. His eyes, mouth, and moon-crafting gait, which could be considered as his weaknesses, were also concealed very well. Mary had wandered behind bloody mouth more than once, tried to attack his moon-crafting gait. Unfortunately, the blood-maw demonic fish's moon-crafting gait was below the huge fishtail. It was completely covered by the flat and powerful fishtail, and Mary had no way of attacking it. Unless Mary could lure Bloodmouth to attack him with its tail, only then would he have a chance to realize his plan. As for the Bloodmaw demonic fish's most obvious flaw, it had a pair of dim yellow eyes above its mouth. That place lacked the protection of the fine magic scales and seemed to be the easiest place to attack. However, Mary was not stupid. After a few probing attacks, she quickly discovered that the flaw in the eye sockets was actually a trap that the Bloodmaw demonfish had left for its enemy. If he wanted to attack there, the enemy would inevitably have to stop in front of his body, which was also where the terrifying mouth of the Bloodmaw demonfish was located. Whether it was the void sludge that he spat out or the corrosive saliva that he spat out, both of them were able to deal terrifying damage to his enemies. The void sludge could trap the enemy in place, and their speed would be greatly reduced for a short period of time. The corrosive saliva was a terrifying type of acid that could corrode and weaken all known magic armors and defensive spells. As long as the enemy's movement was slow, it would seize the opportunity, and the Bloodmaw demonic fish could use its terrifying mouth to swallow the enemy whole. Although Mary was also a rank 2 like him, once she was swallowed into its stomach, there was no way she could escape. Therefore, Mary could only concentrate her attacks on the back of the Bloodmaw demonic fish's body. She used her bloody claws to scratch that area until it was sparkling. The entire fish tail was filled with crisscrossing claw marks and blood marks. Unfortunately, the Bloodmaw demonic fish did not seem to care at all. It was still moving its body with all its might, and its mouth that was filled with dense, sharp teeth kept opening and closing, making terrifying cracking sounds. Mary could not move the transformed Gint, and Gint could not catch the female vampire who was as fast as a ghost. The battle between the two could not help but be in a stalemate. In another corner of the battlefield, the two Blood Knights, Soros and Windsoul, were also looking for the rank 2 physique refinery wizard, Goulet. The three of them were professionals who fought head-on, and almost as soon as they got together, they opened up a blacksmith shop. As a physique refinery wizard, Gullet's body was almost as hard as steel. Coupled with the protection of defensive spells and life force field, his entire body was shockingly hard. The two Blood Knights slashed at Gullet's body from the air, but most of the attacks were deflected and dissipated by the defensive force field. The remaining strength could not even break the skin of a physique refinery wizard, and could only be used as a futile hammer. On the contrary, Gullet's valiant strength, coupled with the long blade, almost every attack was a great threat to the two Blood Knights. If Soros and the others could not dodge in time, the long blade would be able to cut through the surface of their body armor and leave a terrible bone-deep wound on their flesh. More importantly, the two Blood Knights could not hurt Goulet, so they could not drink blood to recover. Once a knight was injured, He could only flee to a corner and capture some human warriors to drink blood to heal himself. The remaining Blood Knight faced a great risk of being killed on the spot by Gullet alone. Hence, in just a short 15 minutes, Soros and Winsoul were in danger. They could only fight while retreating, barely managing to fend off the Physique Refinery Wizard's attacks. However, compared to Mary and the Blood Knight's predicament, the two Blood Elves were much more relaxed. They transformed into blood-colored bats and weaved through the crowd, quickly flying towards a certain wizard's position. The wizards they blocked on the battlefield were all rank 1 wizards from the Undul clan. Although they were all experienced and had outstanding combat strength, against 2 unreasonable pseudo-tier 2 Blood Elves, all tactics and techniques were useless. The 2 Blood Elves never considered the problem of dodging and avoiding damage. They were practically relying on their slightly higher level to crush their opponents. Whenever they found an opportunity, they would madly claw and bite at their opponents' defensive barriers. They could not even be bothered to dodge the enemy's attacks. Against such unreasonable pseudo-tier 2 wizards, the Undul clan's wizards could only grit their teeth and spit blood as they competed in terms of defense. However, no matter how talented a Tier 1 wizard was, he would still be at a disadvantage against a Tier 2 wizard in terms of attack strength. Even if the opponent was only a pseudo-Tier 2 wizard, the outcome would still be the same. Just like that, the 2 Tier 1 wizards from the Undul clan had their defensive barriers torn apart by the Blood Elves. Then the Blood Elves sucked all their blood dry and died. After healing themselves, the 2 injured Blood Elves once again became as ferocious as they had been at the start of the battle. Once again, they roared and charged at new enemies. The Tier 1 wizards that they targeted could only run for their lives. They did not dare to fight them head-on. For a moment, all the Undul clan's wizards on the battlefield were scared out of their wits by the 2 Blood Elves. However, apart from the 2 wizards that were killed by the Blood Elves at the start, the rest of the wizards became even more vigilant once they realized how terrifying the Blood Elves were. Whenever the Blood Elves showed any signs of approaching them, the Undul clan's wizards would immediately turn and run, not giving the Blood Elves a chance to get close. However, this also made it difficult for the wizards to coordinate with the private army of the nobles to deal a fatal blow to the wizards' pagoda's defense line. The human warriors that had been abandoned by the wizards could only raise their wooden shields and advance with difficulty in the lava hall filled with stalagmites and stone peaks, enduring the torrential rain of bullets. In the short span of half an hour of battle, another 1,000 human warriors had fallen into pools of blood in the mud. Seeing this scene, the expressions of all the wizards from the Alliance who were preparing for battle at the back turned serious. They were once again shocked by the depth of the Crimson family's resources. If the wizard's pagoda that was being attacked belonged to their family, how many wizards would dare charge out of the wizard's pagoda and fight against the Wizard Alliance that was 7 to 8 times stronger than them? Now, the other party had pulled the magical machinery out of the pagoda and was playing a seesaw battle with the Alliance, giving the Wizard's pagoda more time to recover and reorganize. Even though the team of fire wizards they sent out had successfully triggered a riot in the sea of lava below the lava hall, cutting off the opportunity for the Wizard's pagoda to continue absorbing fire energy, such large-scale interference and intervention was difficult to sustain. But this kind of large-scale interference was hard to maintain. Once the Crimson family dragged it out until the lava sea calmed down, it would be difficult to repeat the same trick. Therefore, seeing that the Undul clan was unable to gain the upper hand and could not break through the defense line of the magical machinery core, a few of the higher-ups in the Alliance could not sit still. Under the instigation of the Kamara family's level 3 wizard Yurga, the Sinas family, who was supposed to take over the Undul clan's second round of attack in an hour, could only step forward. When the new 16 wizards led nearly 3,000 human warriors onto the battlefield, the atmosphere on the battlefield suddenly froze. After all, there were 3 level 2 wizards in the Sinas family. Their arrival would greatly alleviate the lack of high-level combat power of the Undul clan. The 3,000 human warriors might not be able to affect the overall situation, but the 3 level 2 wizards were a heavy bargaining chip that could affect the balance of the entire battle. Chapter 778. With the appearance of the Senna's family's wizards, the situation on the battlefield, which had just improved a little, became serious again. The Flame Monarch Wizard's Pagoda, which had been slowly accumulating power, had no choice but to scatter a dazzling red light, and began to add a large area of flame protection to the Crimson Wizards and the magic weapon army on the battlefield. Then, it was a large-scale meteor rain that had been accumulating power for a long time. On the ceiling of the lava hall, which was 30 meters high, a large area of fire clouds suddenly gathered. There were blazing flames and bubbles inside, making the whole space dark red, like a gloomy ghost town. The Alliance wizards mixed in the siege team saw that the situation was not good and immediately used their means to retreat from the frontline battlefield. And, as abandoned pieces, the private army of the nobles and the servant army of 4,000 were thrown onto the battlefield. All the human warriors looked up in horror at the huge rolling red cloud above their heads. With the injection of a large amount of flame energy from the wizard's pagoda, the red cloud became bigger and bigger, and it was densely packed with watermelon-sized hot bubbles. Under the pressure of the strong fire element, everyone felt that it was difficult to breathe. It was not cool and refreshing air that entered their chests, but waves of burning heat. Run, we can't wait for death here. With the crazy gathering of fire elements, the warriors on the battlefield, who had been dizzy by the bloody killing, scattered in all directions in horror. Even the warhorses under them lost control, completely disobeying their commands, running around blindly, biting and colliding with each other. The whole battlefield immediately fell into a panic, as if it was the end of the world. But before the secular army on the side of the Alliance could withdraw from the area covered by the fire clouds, a muffled sound of thunder came from the clouds. As some of the bubbles in the clouds burst one after another, streams of scorching flames with innumerable fire elemental bubbles dripped down from the sky. As they fell, they poured out scarlet flames wantonly in all directions. If the bubbles fell on the ground, they would instantly burst into a raging ring of fire, drawing everything within 10 meters into a terrifying golden flame. The bubbles that burst in midair were like beautiful fireworks, sprinkling scorching flames all over the sky. All the people and things that were engulfed by the flames would instantly turn into black smoke and disappear from the world. The only evidence that it once existed was the pile of ashes left on the charred floor. This was the meteor rain spell that the Flame Monarch's Wizard Pagoda had specially strengthened in order to attack its enemies. Judging from the power of this wizard spell and the area it covered, its effects were no less than the stacking of 7 level 2 fire rain meteors. Mortals within the spell's range had no chance of survival. Even rank 1 magi would die if they didn't dodge in time and were hit by more than 3 bubbles at the same time. Hence, when this super meteor shower appeared, nearly half of the lava hall was turned into a raging sea of fire. Most of the noble armies of House Undul and House Sennas, as well as their servants, were annihilated in an instant. Even 3 Grade 1 wizards died in an instant, surrounded by Mary and the others. The Tier 2 Alliance mages managed to escape in a sorry state. Although this super meteor shower was powerful, it wasn't enough to kill a single Grade 2 magus. In an instant, the remaining Alliance mages and noble armies struggled to escape the sea of fire. The moment they stepped out of the sea of fire, they collapsed to the ground in exhaustion, unable to get up again. They finally understood how terrifying the Wizard's Pagoda was. With just a casual attack, it had annihilated over 3,000 noble armies of the Alliance, and even forced the mages of the Undul and Senna's families to the entrance of the lava hall. Logically speaking, when the Alliance suffered such a terrifying attack, the Alliance sorcerers should be depressed and angry. However, the faces of the higher-ups of the Alliance were filled with joy. As expected, a bunch of impatient fellows. Jorgensen laughed coldly. Using such precious wizard energy to deal with a group of mortals with no offensive capabilities, they're really willing to use it. That's right. The old vampire Hennis, who was also by the side, also laughed coldly. If this batch of wizard energy is used well, it's more than enough to kill a grade 2 magus. But they're using it to deal with some small fries. Looks like we can think of a way to bait them into attacking. The Tier 2 sorcerers present nodded in agreement, overjoyed expressions on their faces. They were all people who spent most of their time in the Wizard's Pagoda. Even though they couldn't get an exact estimate of how much fire energy the Super Wizard spell had used, they could roughly guess. If the Crimson Magi had thought of a way to lure the Alliance mages to the Wizard's Pagoda and then unleash this attack, most of the Grade 2 Magi would not be able to withstand such a terrifying attack. But now, the Magi of the Crimson family had wasted such a terrifying attack on mortals. This meant that the safety of the Alliance mages had increased. As long as this happened 2 or 3 times, the small Wizard's Pagoda would not be able to retain much energy. If the energy in the Wizard's Pagoda was depleted, it would be an astronomical figure that even the Magi did not dare to imagine if they wanted to sustain the operation of the Wizard's Pagoda through the use of magical crystals. With the magical crystal reserves that the Crimson family had built for less than a decade, they would not be able to sustain such extravagant behavior. The war had been going on for so long, but the Alliance mages had rarely attacked the Wizard's Pagoda. One of the main reasons was that they were afraid of the Wizard's Pagoda's retaliation. Even level 3 Magi like Yurga and Hennis would have a high chance of dying if they were entangled under the Wizard's Pagoda by the Magi of the Crimson family, and then attacked with the Wizard's Pagoda. Furthermore, all of the wizards value their lives, and would not be willing to step into such a dangerous place that could endanger their lives. That was why, after breaking the connection between the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda and the underground sea of lava, they sent a large number of the private armies of the nobles to deplete the remaining wizard energy of the Wizard's Pagoda. Only by depleting more than half of the energy in the Wizard's Pagoda would the high-level wizards be willing to step onto the battlefield and attempt to capture the small Wizard's Pagoda. Without the support and protection of the Wizard's Pagoda, the manpower of the Crimson family would not be a match for the allied army of the 5 families. When the time came, all of their escape routes would be blocked. The allied army of the 5 families might even be able to seize the world coordinates of the 2 secondary dimensions that the Crimson family controlled. It was said that one of them was a dimension of the giant dragons that was rich in resources. There were large numbers of giant dragons to plunder, as well as countless indigenous slaves to enslave. This was actually the deepest reason why the allied army of the 5 families could be united. Otherwise, no one would be willing to risk their lives and deplete so many armies of ordinary people just for a small Wizard's Pagoda that they could not carry away. Taking advantage of the fact that the sea of fire in the Hall of Lava had yet to subside, the Alliance quickly made adjustments. The Undull family, who had suffered heavy casualties, retreated to recuperate, while the Senna's family chose a new team of 1,000 men. They would charge forward once the sea of fire was extinguished, hoping to get close to the Wizard's Pagoda and force the other party to use the Wizard's Pagoda's defensive powers again. Under the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda, the Crimson family also started making some minor adjustments. All of the archer magic weapons no longer stood in front of the Wizard's Pagoda. Instead, their formation retreated, giving way to the front of the Wizard's Pagoda. If the attackers wanted to attack the archer magic weapons, they could only charge past the Wizard's Pagoda and into the firing line of the magic weapon army. Otherwise, they could only face the rain of bullets from the archer magic weapons and attack the Wizard's Pagoda. This also forced the Wizards of the Alliance to step into the attack range of the Wizard's Pagoda. This also gave the Crimson family a chance to retaliate. Both sides were calculating the chips in their hands, trying to figure out how to neutralize the other party's power. A life-and-death battle erupted again after 15 minutes. The battle in the Hall of Lava was fiery and bloody. Batches of human warriors charged onto the battlefield, then fell tragically on the path of the charge. Their bodies were broken and twisted, piled up into small mountains of corpses. A new batch of warriors stepped onto the bumpy path of corpses, raising their shields high and continuing their charge in silence and numbness. There were no earth-shattering roars, no roars of fighting bravely. All the warriors seemed to have foreseen their fate in advance. They were only moving forward fearfully under the urging of the wizards and nobles. The number of archer magic weapons behind the wizard's pagoda had been reduced from the original 53 to 22, and the Alliance had also buried 5,000-man teams under the wizard's pagoda. This was the sixth batch of warriors charging. Since the start of the war, the Alliance's sorcerers had lost 12,000 of their 30,000 private soldiers and servants. The number of Tier 1 sorcerers from the various families had also been reduced to 17. As for the Crimson family, other than the damage to their magic weapons, they were unharmed. But the leaders of both sides knew that the Crimson family's losses were no less than the Alliance's. After all, the energy within the Wizard's Pagoda was the lifeline of the Crimson family. Now, the energy had dropped to 57%, an extremely dangerous level for the Wizard's Pagoda. Once the energy reserves of the Wizard's Pagoda could no longer pose a threat to the Level 3 wizards, it would be time for the two Level 3 wizards who had been silent to attack. With the combat reserves of the Crimson family, even with the support and protection of the Wizard's Pagoda, it would be difficult for them to fight against so many wizards of the Alliance. The wizards of the Alliance had been holding back until now because they were waiting for the moment when the Crimson family was completely exhausted. When the door of the Wizard's Pagoda was breached, that would be the time for the wizards of the Alliance to unleash their full power. Chapter 779. Icy Wind Territory, White Tower. Even though the White Tower was located in the north and had no way of knowing exactly what was happening in the family's headquarters, private news was still spreading quickly. Most of the family's wizards within the Wizard's Pagoda had been transferred back to the Crimson Throne, trying their best to fend off the invaders. But from the information they had received so far, the situation was not looking good. As such, even the people in the White Tower were panicking, anxious, and uneasy. Fortunately, the person in charge of the Wizard's Pagoda, Wizard Meryl, was still around. With her and the Ice Lady Shefu working together to suppress the unrest, the signs of unrest quickly calmed down. Meryl had been extremely busy over the past few days. On one hand, she had to diligently manage the daily affairs of the White Tower. On the other hand, she had to keep a close eye on the news from the Blazing Flame Monarch, providing them with the greatest amount of resources and manpower at any time. Of course, Meryl also had to divert some of her attention to keep an eye on the activity on the 9th level of the White Tower. Just before the crisis with the Blazing Flame Monarch erupted, the most famous worm wizard of the Crimson family, Bliss, had suddenly returned to his residence on the 9th level of the White Tower to train in seclusion. According to Meryl's understanding, the family had already sent all the resources necessary for him to advance to Level 2 to Bliss. Bliss's choice to train in seclusion now was most likely to allow him to advance to Level 2 as soon as possible. If the Crimson family could have an additional Grade 2 Divine Warrior, it would be extremely beneficial to the Crimson family in such a dire situation. Thus, after hearing the news, Meryl had sent the old fox Venlier to the entrance of Bliss' residence, hoping to receive the news as soon as he came out of seclusion. Within Bliss' residence, the commotion in the outside world could no longer affect Bliss' state of mind. In this secret magical room that had been completely sealed off by spells, Bliss took off the thick black robe that covered his body all year round, revealing his evil and ugly worm body. After nearly 100 years of bloodshed, Bliss's worm body no longer looked like a human. A pitch-black carapace that flickered with a dark luster, an ugly mouth shaped like a lotus petal, densely packed compound eyes embedded in the front of his head, and thick and clumsy chelicerae. Blitz crawled on the floor like a real worm, his abdomen expanding and contracting rapidly. His body emitted a dense, crackling sound, as though his worm body could no longer withstand the enormous power he had devoured. Countless cracks suddenly appeared on the black carapace, and the cracks grew wider and wider. Through the cracks in the carapace, one could even see the translucent abdominal sac that had expanded to its limit. Thick yellow viscous unknown body fluid was roiling inside, and tadpole-like strange insect eggs could be seen from time to time. As a worm wizard, Blitz's method of advancement was definitely different from ordinary magi. His current situation was not like a normal human wizard's advancement at all. Instead, it was more like the evolution of an insect-type monster. Blitz rolled on the floor in agony, his hideous mouth spewing out thick, sticky, acidic mist that covered his entire body. As soon as the acidic mist came into contact with the air on the floor, there was a strange, sizzling sound of corrosion. However, as soon as Blitz's insect body came into contact with the acidic mist, his originally mournful cries of pain lessened a bit. It was as though this terrifying acidic mist had a nourishing and lubricating effect, alleviating a portion of the pain from his carapace being torn apart. As a core magus of the Crimson family, Blitz was able to enjoy many special benefits. After the war in the Farron Plain, the Crimson family had obtained a large number of life crystals. These crystals had all been devoured by Bliss, and had become the biggest support for him to complete this evolution. However, in the process of evolution, Blitz was once again faced with a difficult choice. The process of advancing to rank 2 was actually a process of choosing a node on the path of becoming a worm. Blitz now had to choose between strengthening his insect body or strengthening his insect swarm. If he chose to strengthen his insect body, he would be able to change his frail appearance and increase the hardness and magic resistance of his carapace by 100-fold. At that time, he would be able to defend against the attacks of ordinary rank 2 magi with just his insect body that was harder than steel. This was obviously a choice that would allow him to walk on the path of fighting against the insectoids. If he chose to strengthen his insect swarm, there would only be a small increase in his own defense and magic resistance. Most of the advanced abilities would be amplified on the insect swarm that he led. All the spells that he had learnt and grasped would benefit all of his insect swarm through the amplification halo. This choice would undoubtedly make him the master of the insect swarm once again, and also the mother nest that relied on the sea of insects to fight. After thinking about it, the usually cowardly Blitz, who did not like to fight head-on with others, finally chose the mother nest's path of evolution. Once the direction of evolution was confirmed, under the influence of the strange evolutionary force, Blitz's strange insect body that had expanded into a ball began to show some astonishing changes. The color of Blitz's black carapace constantly changed, and his thick chelicerae also became thicker and more powerful. However, these changes were not as obvious as the changes in his abdomen. The digestive and excretory organs could no longer be seen in the abdomen of the evolved insect body. All the space in the abdomen had been divided into sacs of different sizes, and Blitz could create special insects according to his wishes. After the evolution, Blitz could no longer rely on devouring food and flesh to accumulate life energy like before. Without his stomach sac and digestive fluid, he had lost the ability to feed and digest himself. He could only rely on the life energy plundered by the swarm of insects to sustain his life. Hence, rather than saying that Blitz was a magus, it would be more accurate to say that he was a mother nest that could walk freely. After completing the arduous evolution, the first thing Blitz did was to summon the demonic mantises that he had concocted earlier. A total of 23 Grade 1 intermediate demonic mantises surrounded him like a group of loyal guards. They bowed slightly, silently pledging their loyalty to him. Blitz's appearance did not seem to have changed much after his evolution, but if someone were to carefully examine his body, they would realize that he had undergone an earth-shattering transformation. Bliss carefully observed the group of demonic mantises that were acting as his bodyguards. When he extended his mental strength into their soul imprints, the group of demonic mantises that were only at the intermediate stage of Tier 1 shrieked in pain and began to mutate rapidly. Their bodies were stretching, their wings were spreading, and their bones were growing. Their terrifying, sickle-shaped forelimbs became abnormally sharp, and there was a faint magical luster flickering on them. In front of Bliss, 5 of the demonic mantises had successfully evolved into void predators. These were ferocious monsters at the beginning of the second grade. Although they maintained the appearance of demonic mantises, they were much more ferocious and valiant than normal ones. Void travel gave them the strange ability to temporarily enter the layers of space. This ability was also very suitable for passing through obstacles or evading enemy attacks. With their current strength, they could only maintain the void travel ability for 3 seconds, and the cooldown was only 18 seconds. They could also temporarily attach this ability to their sickle-shaped forelimbs, giving them the ability to ignore defense and slash. Unfortunately, their physique after evolution was still at the lower end of the Grade 2 monster group. They were predatory monsters with thin skin and brittle HP, but strong attacks. Once the evolution of the bugs was completed, there was a slight difference in their creature rank. 5 void predators flapped their strong wings and crouched at the place closest to Blitz, while the other demonic mantises retreated to the distance and crawled quietly on the ground, not daring to compete with these void predators for a position in front. As for the densely packed bugs, they were scattered further away and gathered into a wriggling ring, silently guarding the evolution of the master of the swarm. Blitz looked at this group of newly evolved void predators with a face full of joy. This was the first time he felt the power of a bug wizard. If 5 initial Grade 2 void predators worked together to surround and attack a Grade 2 magus, Blitz did not think that the other party would have any hope of escaping or surviving. If there was a flaw in the void predators, it would be that they could not use scrolls, potions, or magic wands like human magi. They could only rely on their powerful bodies to fight. Otherwise, with the protection of these skilled and fearless bug generals, Blitz was confident that he could take on 3 or 4 Grade 2 magi and emerge victorious. After all, magi cherished their lives, and bug generals did not fear death. As soon as Blitz stepped out of his residence, Wizard Merrill received the news and hurried over. Standing in front of Blitz, who was dressed in a strange black robe, although she couldn't see any skin on his body, Merrill firmly believed that he had successfully advanced to the next level. This was because in front of him, Merrill, who had the strength of an initial Grade 1 void predator, felt a strange sense of fear welling up from the depths of her heart. If not for Blitz restraining his ferocious bug aura, Merrill might not even have had the chance to stand in front of him. The spiritual pressure from the rank difference, coupled with Blitz's unique ferocious aura, made him no longer the loathed bug exorcist of the past. "Lord, Blitz!" Merrill bit her lips, trying hard to suppress the crazed fear in her heart. "Congratulations on becoming a Grade 2 magus." Hiss! Chapter 780. Lance Plain. Inside the huge metal fortress, all the machines were operating at the highest efficiency. Hundreds of construction machines were busy working in the dark tunnel in the metal mine nearly a kilometer underground. There were no humans here at all, so there were no lamps for lighting. All the machines were busy moving in and out of the deep darkness, transporting the mined ores into the elevator shaft. Most of the ores that had just been mined were iron ores rich in metal. They needed to be transported to the grinding workshop to be crushed into fine slags before being sent to the smelting workshop for preliminary metal refinement. After that, they had to be sent to the refining workshop to be cast into metal ingots that were easier to transport and store. The machines in the workshops that were closely connected to each other were roaring, and the conveyor belts were running nonstop, until the metal ingots that were 1 meter square and weighed 1 ton were transported to the warehouse. This fully automated metal mining, smelting, and casting process was officially completed. Ever since the brain monster Gazlurvi commanded the metal fortress to set up a foundation in the Stoneclaw Mountains, the mining of resources and the creation of magic machines had never stopped. In just 3 to 5 years, a huge mineral vein that spanned over 100 kilometers had been almost completely excavated. The foundation of the entire Stoneclaw Mountains had been dug out. Many areas had serious land subsidence and mountain collapses. Meanwhile, The brain monster Gazlurvi had obtained up to 110,000 primal bodies of magic machine warriors. Unfortunately, they were only primal bodies of magic machine warriors and not combat bodies that had activated the Intelligent Control Center. It was not that Gazlurvi did not want to activate them all, but the energy supply of the Metal Fortress could not keep up. If each magic machine warrior wanted to maintain normal activities for a whole day, they would need to consume 4 to 6 magic energy batteries. If they were to face a tense battle, the energy consumption would double. However, the magic energy produced by the magic furnace that the brain monster Gazlurvi could only fill up to 800 magic energy batteries in a day at most. Moreover, in addition to the magic energy batteries, the Metal Fortress also had many magic machine manufacturing and research workshops that needed a large amount of magic energy to maintain the operation. In this way, the magic furnace could only produce 500 magic energy batteries a day, which was already the limit. In order to save magic energy as much as possible, all the magic machine warriors that walked down the assembly line remained in their primal body state and were not activated. They were then stuffed into the hollowed-out mountains in batches. On the other hand, the Metal Fortress only maintained the minimum number of 150 magical mechanical warriors. After years of recuperation, the brain monster, Gazlurvi, had finally accumulated nearly 1,000,000 magical energy batteries with great difficulty. This also meant that the brain monster, Gazlurvi, who had endured for many years, finally had a material basis for a strong explosion. Just as Gazlurvi was silently thinking about which dragon lord he should target, a rare visitor came to the Metal Fortress. "Dear Madam Alice, welcome to the Metal Fortress. How may I be of service to you?" Although Gazlurvi's rank was higher than Alice's, the brain monster that was under the control of others was very clear about its position. Thus, when facing this woman who was likely to become its mistress, it was extremely fawning and passionate. In a purple starry robe, Alice, who had regained her beauty, stood alone in the spacious and huge metal hall. Apart from the silver-white metal floor, there was nothing else she could see. As the magic furnace that Gazlurvi resided in had now become the magical energy source of the entire Metal Fortress, it could not easily leave the engine room. Thus, he could only communicate with Alice through spiritual messages. Alice held a mysterious staff that was much taller than her, and the lively magic spirit Helen was flying on her shoulder. She squinted her eyes and looked around before asking softly, "Your Excellency, Gazlurvi, have you received the warning message from the Flame Monarch?" A moment later, the spacious metal hall immediately overflowed with Gazlurvi's unique spiritual waves. "I've received it and responded to their call. I've dispatched 200 magic machine warriors and 20,000 magical energy batteries. These are not enough to solve the crisis that the Crimson Throne is facing," Alice said resolutely. "That's not my problem, beautiful lady." Gazlurvi laughed coldly. "Before Master left, he ordered me to protect this Metal Fortress and provide a stable and safe base for the Crimson family. As for everything that happens in the Magus world, it's not within my jurisdiction. But the Crimson Throne is extremely important to your master. It should not be abandoned in the hands of the enemy like this." "I still have the same answer," Gazlurvi insisted. "This is not my problem. If you want me to pay more, please get master's orders." Alice smiled slightly. Although Grimm still maintained a weak connection with her, they were in a dangerous place and could not be contacted at all times. Thus, Gazlurvi's insistence was actually just an excuse. It was obvious that Gazlurvi had already regarded the entire Metal Fortress and its appendages as his own private property. He was not willing to contribute more to others other than his master. Although he did not mind maintaining cooperation with the other magi of the Crimson family, it was wishful thinking to use the military forces and resources under him. Alice was obviously prepared for such a situation. "Your Excellency, Gazlurvi, you're planning to walk the path of spiritual mutation, right? What are your thoughts on the direction of advancement in the future?" The hall suddenly fell silent. After a while, Gazlurvi's spiritual undulations appeared again. "I heard that you're a great witch of destiny. I wonder if you have any suggestions or guidance for my current development. Surprisingly, the previously arrogant grade 3 brain monster was extremely humble at this moment, and its figure was especially soft. I can't say that I have any suggestions or guidance. I'm just curious and interested in your current situation. A proud and intelligent person like you naturally has long-term plans and adjustments for your life. However, I need to remind you of a problem. Never, ever underestimate the development of your origin. The hall was silent for a moment. You mean to say that I've already deviated from my origin? Alice smiled lightly once again. What do you think? I was originally a goblin duke in the Goblin Empire. In order to escape the shackles of life, I thought of ways to mutate my brain into its current form. For this, I even completely abandoned my previous identity as a goblin and completely regarded myself as a brain monster. So, the origin of my soul should be spiritual force. It's good that you understand. Alice gently grabbed Helen, who was flying around in front of her, and placed her on her shoulder again before continuing. Your soul's origin is on the path of spiritual mutation. Its characteristic is that it can assimilate foreign metals that have been infused with magical energy. This powerful ability has become your most powerful tool, helping you to build such a grand metal fortress. If there were no restrictions on energy and resources, it would be more than enough for you to build a city of steel by yourself. Hearing Alice's flattery, Gazruvi did not feel happy at all. Instead, he quietly waited for the change in her words. As expected, Alice's tone changed, and she said the words that he did not want to hear the most. It's a pity that such a powerful ability has bewitched you and made you forget the origin of your soul. Your origin is spiritual force, and not the forging of foreign magic machinery. Building so many magic machinery warriors may give you a false illusion that you're becoming stronger, but I still want to ask you one more thing. Since you chose to fuse with the magic furnace, has your own strength really strengthened? The metal hall fell silent once more. This time, it was really dead silent. Even the continuous rumbling in the distance and the faint vibration under their feet suddenly stopped. This metal city, made of pure foreign metals, suddenly fell into a true deathly silence. After a long time, Gazruvi's spiritual wave connected to Alice again. It seems that I've wasted all these years in vain. I've spent all my energy on the meaningless building of the magic machinery army. If I can't find a development path that's really suitable for me, my path of evolution may stay at grade 3 forever. This is absolutely unbearable for me. Don't always think to extremes. Your current behavior is not completely wrong. At least, you can absolutely guarantee your own safety before you have a chance to consider the future development path. You haven't really wasted all these years. At least, the magic machinery army you built has protected your safety and has become the body and cornerstone to carry out and execute your will in the future. As long as you find the right direction, with the help of the magic machinery army, your progress will be much faster. But I'm very confused. I really don't know how a real brain monster should advance. Let my brain divide and multiply more, or find a way to devour the brains of some other intelligent life. I'm very confused and confused. Maybe I can provide you with a suitable way to obtain the knowledge of brain monster advancement. Really, Gazruvi's spiritual wave suddenly became intense, and the entire metal fortress rumbled with its spiritual secret language that was almost like a roar. Fortunately, Alice had cut off the spiritual channel between the two of them in advance. Otherwise, she would definitely be stunned by the spiritual shockwave of a grade 3 brain monster. But my information is never free. Now it depends on how much you're willing to pay for it. Then, the metal hall was filled with whispers between Alice and Gazruvi. Their voices became softer and softer. Chapter 781. Wizard World. Blazing Flame Monarch. The battle in front of the Wizard's Pagoda was nearing its end. In the 7 days and 7 nights of battle, almost all of the 200 magical machines sent out by the Blazing Flame Monarch had been destroyed in the lava hall. The Alliance had also lost the lives of 26 wizards and over 24,000 soldiers of the Allied army. Of course, the loss of the former was even more heart-wrenching for the higher-ups of the Alliance. After all, no matter how many ordinary soldiers were killed, they could quickly return to their territories and recruit more soldiers. If there were not enough young men in their territories, they could just let the citizens do their best to reproduce. The citizens were like chives in a field. Once they were harvested, they would slowly grow back. That was why the wizards had never worried about the lack of ordinary soldiers. But the loss of these 26 wizards was heart-wrenching for the higher-ups of the Alliance. If these 26 wizards were gathered in one family, it would be enough to wipe out a wizard family. One could imagine how tragic and heart-wrenching the battle in the lava hall had been over the past 7 days. One of the 26 wizards was a level 2 wizard from the Leighton Academy. This made the dean of the Leighton Academy, level 2 wizard Gil, so furious that he almost went berserk. There were only 3 level 2 wizards in the entire Leighton Academy. One stayed behind to guard the headquarters, while Dean Gil brought the other to join the Anti-Crimson Family Alliance. They had followed the main force to this place that they hated to the bone. In the first few rounds of attacks, the situation on the battlefield had been relatively stable, with the Alliance basically in control. But as the elite private army of the nobles was depleted, the servant army became weaker, and the signs of mental collapse began to show. To prevent the ordinary soldiers on the front lines from completely collapsing, the wizards of the Alliance had no choice but to appear at the front lines, using their powerful offensive wizard spells to destroy one annoying metal magical machine after another. The wizards of the Crimson family also made use of the opportunity when they were close to the Wizard's Pagoda to attack the magical machines, quickly launching attacks from within the Wizard's Pagoda, gaining the advantage of numbers. Thus, the unlucky wizards of the Alliance fell one after another at the hands of the Crimson family. It was the same for the fallen level 2 wizard. Just as he crossed the tall tower and unleashed his might to wreak havoc on the defensive line of magical weapons, the 7 level 2 members of the Crimson family hiding in the Wizard's Pagoda actually joined forces to attack. Those who needed to block the way, those who needed to block the way, those who needed to intercept, those who needed to engage in melee combat. After a fierce battle, the Tier 2 sorcerer from Leighton Academy died at Mary's hands before his companions could arrive to rescue him. As for that Tier 3 vampire, Heinz, Vic had wanted to take the opportunity to launch a sneak attack on Mary, but he was forced to retreat by the terrifying lightning released by the Wizard's Pagoda. Because of this, Hennis did not appear on the battlefield for 2 days. However, no matter how many miracles the Crimson family created on the battlefield, they could not prevent the Wizard's Pagoda from falling. As the Wizard's Pagoda's energy was greatly depleted, the layer of brilliant clouds that surrounded the body of the Wizard's Pagoda had already disappeared. This meant that the Wizard's Pagoda could no longer support the force field defense of the entire domain. He could only temporarily stop the defense system of the Wizard's Pagoda and use the remaining energy to attack the wizard formation in order to intimidate the restless wizards of the Alliance. During this period of time, the Crimson family was able to create 0 vs 26 miracles on the battlefield were due to the constant support of the Wizard's Pagoda and the deterrence of the powerful Wizard's Pagoda's offensive spell formation. Those high-level wizards were clearly overseeing the battlefield from the back, but they did not step within 100 meters of the Wizard's Pagoda. Why was that? Because they did not want to become a pitiful sacrifice to the Wizard's Pagoda's offensive system. The Crimson family's energy reserves were still too little. Otherwise, the wizards of the Alliance would not dare to easily attack a wizard tower that was supported by an endless supply of energy, even if they had twice the number of people. Unless all the wizards of the Alliance had the courage to unite and die with the Wizard's Pagoda, no wizard would be foolish enough to use their lives to test the power of the other party's Wizard's Pagoda. After all, under the control of a level 2 wizard, the Wizard's Pagoda's offensive spell formation could pose a threat to the life of a level 3 wizard. But now, as the energy reserves of the Wizard's Pagoda dwindled, the threat it posed to the high-level wizards was also decreasing. The high-level wizards of the Alliance were also becoming more active. After a few days of continuous attacks, the surface of the wizard's pagoda that had once intimidated tens of thousands of magical beasts had begun to show signs of damage. As for the main battlefield, the lava hall, it had become a furnace of flesh and blood that would cause people to shrink back in fear. The thick, pungent stench of blood would rush into one's head the moment one stepped into it. What was even more terrifying was the thick pile of corpses. One could see layers upon layers of terrifying corpses starting from the entrance of the lava hall, and the corpses were piled higher and thicker all the way to the center of the battlefield. Bloody corpses with dismembered limbs and bodies, all sorts of grotesque and tragic deaths were there. It was an indescribably gruesome sight. As the battle had lasted for too long, the corpses of the Alliance soldiers who had died in battle did not have the chance to be transported to the back. They could only be transported to a corner of the lava hall on carts and temporarily piled together. As the battle became more and more intense, they did not even have the time to clean up the corpses. The attacking troops of the Alliance could only step on the undulating flesh and blood forest, fighting against the magical machines around the wizard's pagoda amidst the blood and mud. The corpses of over 20,000 Alliance soldiers were spread out in the lava hall. After being continuously trampled and smashed by the large feet of the people who came later, the bodies that formed the pile of corpses had long since become unrecognizable. It was difficult to recognize their original appearances. Only the stinking, rotten black blood flowed out of the pile of corpses, leaving black streams that were almost dried up on the stone floor of the lava hall. A large amount of rotten black blood was evaporated by the high temperature, turning into a bloody mist that floated within the hellish lava hall. Humans with strong constitutions would run the risk of contracting a nasty disease if they stayed in such a dirty and harmful environment for more than 15 minutes, while those with weaker constitutions might be killed on the spot. However, the remaining Alliance soldiers fought and killed in such a harsh environment. They used siege hammers, battering rams, and the swords, axes, and hammers in their hands to attack the door of the wizard's pagoda and the dark red base of the wizard's pagoda. Batches of soldiers fell, and new batches of soldiers took their place. Their strength was getting weaker and weaker, and their courage had long been worn out. However, under the pressure of the wizards and the nobles, they still had to muster up their courage and roar as they rushed towards the towering, almost unshakable tower. Every time they gathered around the tower, the body of the wizard's pagoda would tremble slightly. Then, thousands of magical lines that were usually hidden within the body of the wizard's pagoda would light up, guiding a large amount of magical energy to gather at the top of the wizard's pagoda. There, it would condense into a powerful, large-scale wizard spell, then blast all of the enemies into pieces. With the power of mortals, without the protection of wizard spells, it was impossible for them to defend against a wizard spell attack of this level. A large amount of flesh and blood was incinerated, a large number of weapons were destroyed, and a large number of souls disappeared from the world while wailing. Some of the more resentful individuals had their illusory souls temporarily not perished after their original bodies died. They still wandered the battlefield in a daze, just like when they were alive. They still retained the appearance they had when they were alive, but their bodies were emitting a faint fluorescent light, looking a little hazy and illusory. They were either standing stiffly, kneeling on the ground and crying, or wandering aimlessly. Every time a living being passed by them, they would stare at them with soulless eyes, reach out their almost transparent hands, and wail for help. And once their wishes were not fulfilled, they would instantly become abnormally enraged, transforming into ugly and ferocious, vengeful spirits in the shortest amount of time possible, madly pouncing toward the Alliance soldiers. Even though they were just illusory bodies, they could still cause a certain amount of damage to a living person with a body of flesh and blood. Thus, in some of the battlefields where the spirits were gathered, the attacks of the Alliance soldiers were greatly disrupted. Originally, with the strength of an ordinary person's soul, it was impossible for them to transform into a spirit in such a short amount of time. But there was too much magical energy dispersing from the battlefield today, and too many lives had perished. That was why such a strange land of vengeful spirits had been created by various coincidences. Left with no choice, the wizards of the Alliance army could only send some wizard apprentices to specifically exterminate these vengeful spirits that were unwilling to perish even after their original bodies had died. And at the back of the Alliance army, many wizards were still coldly observing this bloody and cruel war. The large number of deaths of the Alliance soldiers was just a boring number to them. Even though they would have to pay a large sum of gold coins to compensate their families, it was 1,000 times better than letting them experience the attacks of the Wizard's Pagoda. In fact, some wizards of the Alliance army, who urgently needed a large number of souls to conduct wizard experiments, even sneaked into the battlefield and used some special wizard weapons to collect a portion of the souls of the soldiers. The higher-ups of the Alliance army also chose to ignore such actions. After all, they had done something like this before, just that the scale was not as large and the actions were not as eye-catching. Furthermore, even if they did not collect these souls, they would dissipate into the world and return to the Mother River of Souls. Rather than that, they might as well let the souls contribute a little to their former owners before they completely perish. How much energy does the Wizard's Pagoda have left? The level 3 wizard Yurga, who was leading the team, asked coldly. A level 1 wizard beside him quickly took out a strange wizard weapon and aimed it at the Wizard's Pagoda. Soon, he measured a relatively accurate number. "We still have 1275 punars, my lord." Punars was a basic unit of magical energy that the wizards had defined. 1 punar was equivalent to the basic magical energy of a level 1 fireball. 1,275 punars might sound like a large number, but it would seem a little lacking if it was used on a wizard's pagoda. Very good, very good. Yurga let out a cold laugh and said excitedly, "After waiting for so long, this moment has finally come. Next, I announce that all wizards are to throw themselves into the battle and strive to exhaust the last of the opponent's magical energy in 2 hours, then attack the wizard's pagoda. The first wizard to attack the wizard's pagoda will have the priority to choose a spoil of war. The family or faction that this wizard belongs to will also have an additional 3% of the spoils of war." Chapter 782. Compared to the high morale of the Alliance, the atmosphere within the Blazing Flame Monarch was gloomy and gloomy. Even though the Crimson Wizards had not suffered any losses, the elemental pool within the Wizard's Pagoda's energy room was slowly reaching its bottom, and a family-style crisis was about to befall them. The Blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda no longer had any excess energy to maintain the defense system of the tower. This also gave the attackers a reason to attack the base of the Wizard's Pagoda at close range. Following the dull thuds, the entire Wizard's Pagoda trembled slightly. The Wizard's Pagoda had already used stones to seal the many airtight windows, then turned the remaining magical energy into an energy field wall and a flame barrier to seal the door of the Wizard's Pagoda. They did not have the energy to send down lightning to kill the large group of enemies gathered around the base of the Wizard's Pagoda. With the crude construction equipment of the enemy, they would need at least half a day to create a path through the 3-meter-thick base of the volcanic tower. Thus, the greatest threat to the Wizard's Pagoda at the moment was still the Alliance wizards, and not the group of Alliance warriors attacking the Wizard's Pagoda like ants. As all of the entrances had been sealed, the only way for the enemy to successfully enter the Wizard's Pagoda was through the door of the Wizard's Pagoda, which had a metal door embedded in it. The wizards of the Crimson family were all gathered in the Wizard Hall on the first floor, instructing the remaining archer magical devices to fire at the mass of people outside through a few small shooting ports. The dull thuds of metal bullets piercing through human bodies rang out incessantly. The Alliance warriors, who had gathered into a ball of flesh, did not seem to care about death, continuing to hack at the sturdy body of the tower with their blades, axes, and hammers without fear of death. Even though the body of the tower made of volcanic rock was not indestructible, it was harder than steel and had a high resistance to fire. If the Wizard's Pagoda were to pour in magical energy and activate the sturdy wizard formation etched within the volcanic rock, The ordinary weapons of the Alliance warriors would not be able to damage it at all. Unfortunately, the wizard's pagoda was currently lacking in energy. All of its magical energy had been used to seal the door, and it could only allow the enemy to attack the tower without fear. The cautious wizards of the Alliance seemed to have detected the predicament of the Flame Monarch's wizard pagoda, and they all became active. They quietly approached the wizard pagoda and started to use powerful wizard spells to attack the uncovered body of the wizard pagoda. The firmness of volcanic rock was indeed not bad, and its resistance to fire was excellent. Unfortunately, its ability to resist other types of sorcery was somewhat lacking. Under the barrage of the ferocious wizard spells, the surface of the wizard's pagoda's volcanic rock started to crack. Rock fragments of various sizes were scattered everywhere like snow. The wizard's pagoda was in danger. In times of crisis like this, the loyalty of the family's magi could be seen more clearly. Medusa, Sharon the Manicore, Sophia, the Berserk Witch, Soros and Windsole the Blood Knight, Phyrai and Telania the Blood Elf, Ava and her beloved daughter Amelia the Forest Demon, Zacha the Dragon Man. They firmly sealed the entrance to the hall on the first floor, taking turns to charge and kill the warriors of the Alliance who wanted to break into the wizard's pagoda. Under the enemy's tide-like attacks, their magical energy and stamina were also quickly being depleted. Most of the wizards were more or less injured. If not for the protection of the wizard's pagoda and the healing potions, some of them might have already collapsed to the ground. Now that they were at the end of their rope, the wizards who stayed behind had to make a choice between escaping or defending. Sending all the wizards away through the teleportation formation, while the wizard's pagoda still had the energy to isolate them from the outside world, was undoubtedly the best way to reduce the family's losses. But just as the Gargamel was not confident in defending the wizard's pagoda, the temporary leader, Mary, stood her ground and decided on a plan to continue defending. Her reason was simple. Alice had promised her that the Flame Monarch would not fall. Mary had no doubt about that. As for her blood tribe subordinates, they naturally had to advance and retreat with her. As Grimm's sole slave, the Dragon Man Zacha displayed a loyal and fearless spirit as usual, standing at the front line to protect the wizard's pagoda. In comparison, the gnome Tygol was a little hesitant and had an unfriendly conversation with Mary. But just as the two of them were arguing, the teleportation formation on the fourth level of the wizard's pagoda was inexplicably activated. It looked like someone was trying to teleport over. Mary, Tygol, and Gargamel could not help but look at each other. Of course, only their own people knew the coordinates of this teleportation formation. But the Flame Monarch was already in such a state, yet there were still wizards who dared to step into the muddy waters. This was too unbelievable. Under the silent gaze of the few of them, the teleportation formation shone with a white light, and a familiar yet unfamiliar man in a black cloak appeared before them. Billis! Gargamel's mouth opened wider and wider, and he even stuttered when he said the name of the person who had come. Lord, with much difficulty, Gargamel finally managed to spit out the word, my lord. Once upon a time, this wizard apprentice Bliss had been a lowly person who worked hard under him. If not for Gargamel recommending him to the head of the family, this little fellow might still be struggling in the circle of apprentices. But only a few years had passed, and this little apprentice had actually grown into a lord that even he had to bow respectfully to. An indescribable feeling of disillusionment assaulted Gargamel's heart, and he could not help but wonder if he had chosen the wrong path. Not bad, as expected of the fellow I thought highly of. You've indeed become a grade 2. Mary sized up the black-robed Bliss. Although the other party had concealed his body very tightly, Mary could still vaguely sense his approximate level from the close proximity of their auras. Greetings, Lady Mary. Perhaps it was because he had been ruthlessly abused by Mary during his time as an apprentice that caused Bliss to tremble at the sight of her. Furthermore, an insect lord like him was most afraid of agile assassins. Bliss was confident that he could kill other professional magi with his frightening numbers of insects and newly evolved insect generals. But this was useless against Mary. Mary's extraordinary speed was something that even an evolved Void Plunderer could not compare to. But in terms of numbers, Mary's 4 Grade 2 generals were not much weaker than Bliss. As long as the Bloodbreeds could hold back the 5 Void Plunderers for a moment, it would not be difficult for Mary to take off Bliss's head. As for Bliss's ability to transform into a swarm of insects to avoid the enemy's attacks, it was useless in front of Mary. After all, after Bliss had fused with the strange insect queen, his soul imprint was under Grimm's control. No matter how many times he transformed, Grimm would still be able to find his soul in the dense swarm of insects. As Grimm's concubine, Mary seemed to have been given some special privileges by him. This was actually the main reason why Bliss had always been afraid of Mary. You come at the right time. This place is about to collapse, but the reinforcements that Alice promised have yet to arrive. We still need you to hold the Wizard's Pagoda for a while. Do you have any objections? Mary asked with a smile, but there was no hint of pleading or begging in her eyes. No objections. No objections. Bliss immediately said in a hoarse voice, "My family has put in so much effort to nurture me. I naturally have to contribute in times of crisis." After saying this, Bliss strode out of the teleportation room and headed for the Wizard Hall on the first floor. As he walked, Bliss's body, shrouded in the black cloak, was like dumplings being thrown into a pot, clattering as clumps of black beetles fell to the ground. These black beetles were all the size of a fist, with hard shells and sharp fangs. They even had 2 pairs of strange elytra, one large and one small, on their backs. Blitz's body, which was shrouded by the black robe, seemed to have opened a portal to a strange world. Swarms of black beetles swarmed out from within and gathered into a group. They swarmed and flew down the spiral staircase. The screams of the female sorcerers and the roars of the male sorcerers suddenly rang out in the Wizard Hall on the first floor. Fortunately, they had quickly received a communication spell from Mary and did not attack the terrifying swarm of beetles that brushed past their clothes and hair. "It's Lord Bliss. He's advanced to rank 2. The Magi, who were familiar with the situation, immediately guessed the reason. At this critical moment for the family, another powerful rank 2 Magus had stood out. No matter what, this was a good thing to be thankful for. The large swarm of beetles circled above the hall for a moment and immediately condensed into a black arrow, shooting towards the black mass of people gathered outside the light barrier. The Alliance warriors, who had been attacking the force field with all their might a moment ago, seemed to have fallen into a black torrent in the next moment. They began to stagger backwards involuntarily and wave their swords in a daze. The black beetles were not afraid of normal swords. Even if a 2-handed greatsword slashed at the surface of their carapace, there would only be a dazzling spark, and they would spin a few times before flapping their elytral wings to adjust their posture. They would then merge into the swarm of beetles and continue their assault on the enemy. Tens of thousands of black beetles that resembled locusts converged into a black torrent, rapidly sweeping through the densely packed crowd. Wherever they passed, the concentrated sounds of tearing and tearing never stopped. And when the black torrent swept through the crowd, what was left behind was a horrifying carcass that was incomplete, with only bits and pieces of armor left. Originally, there was only one swarm of beetles, but as more and more beetles swarmed out, the swarm began to split. In an instant, a dozen black, ribbon-like swarm of beetles weaved through the crowd in front of the Wizard's Pagoda, tearing and tearing, spreading a deep terror to every corner of the battlefield. Chapter 783. At this moment, the Alliance army was actually dispensable. From start to finish, the 30,000 soldiers of the Alliance had been nothing more than cannon fodder used by the Wizards to deplete the defenses of the Wizard's Pagoda. Now that the Blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda was half dead, the rest of the work could be done by the Wizards. That was why the Wizards of the Alliance, who were mixed in with the troops, immediately charged out when they saw the Crimson Wizards counterattack. Since the 5 factions dared to attack the Blazing Flame Monarch, they had naturally investigated the Crimson family's roots. They had also heard of the worm Lich Bliss. However, a rank 1 magus with a mutated bloodline was not worthy of their attention. Thus, 6 or 7 wizards immediately threw out wizard fireballs, which exploded into a giant ball of flames in the air and engulfed the large group of black beetles. According to their expectations, a fireball like that would instantly turn hundreds or thousands of black beetles into ashes. But what surprised them was that as the fireballs continued to explode, the number of dead beetles was far less than they had expected, even though there were a few charred beetle corpses falling from the sky. From the looks of it, it seemed that a 110-degree wizard fireball could only kill 10 to 20 black beetles in the core area. At the edge of the fireball explosion, most of the beetles were only injured but not dead, and did not lose their ability to move. This scene caused many of the wizards present to be slightly stunned. Beginner-level resistance? Could such a large swarm of beetles have beginner-level resistance? How many resources did the worm lich have to expend to achieve this? Just as the wizards were in a state of shock, the swarm of beetles that had been massacring was suddenly ambushed. They split up like intelligent creatures, then split into 6 armies of beetles, majestically launching a counterattack along the path of the attack. What a terrifying swarm of beetles! The wizards of the Alliance laughed sinisterly in praise, then gathered a powerful area of effect spell and threw it at the swarm of beetles. This time, the spells they chose were even more powerful and had a wider area of effect. The warriors of the Alliance caught between the two could only howl in pain and flee, no longer having the courage to charge at the enemy. The speed of the swarm of black bugs was out of the Alliance's expectation. Although large clumps of burnt bug carcasses fell from the sky, it did not affect the swarm's speed at all. Just as the Alliance wizards were about to cast their next spell, the swarm of insects had already arrived in front of them. The 6 Alliance magi who bore the brunt of the attack immediately faced a thorny problem. Should he cancel the spell in his hand and escape, or should he just throw it away? The swarm of insects was so close to them. If they threw out the witchcraft, they might even be affected. Just as they hesitated, the swarm of black insect had already engulfed their bodies. Balls of colorful protective spells quickly propped up in the midst of the countless squirming beetles. The Alliance wizards who were entangled by the beetles quickly slaughtered the beetles that were crazily gnawing on the transparent protective shield while shouting for help from their companions around them. As far as the eye could see, it was filled with hideous black beetles that occupied the entire space in front of him. They were densely packed, layer upon layer, like a wriggling pile of black bugs, completely drowning the 6 wizards in the black tide. The sorcery unleashed by the Alliance wizards exploded in the swarm of insects, blowing a large group of black beetles into pieces and smelly black blood. But as soon as the witchcraft disappeared, the wizards who had just revealed a small part of their bodies were swallowed up by the swarm of insects. The Alliance wizards who were trapped in the swarm of insects watched in horror as the witchcraft shield became thinner and thinner. While desperately calling for help, they frantically bombarded the swarm of insects around them. In the end, there were still 2 Alliance wizards who were strong enough to blast a path out of the swarm of insects. They forcefully endured the insects that crawled all over the protective shield and ran out. As for the remaining 4 Alliance wizards, before their companions dared to come to their rescue, their protective shields were attacked by the swarm of insects. Following a shrill and twisted scream, the 4 wizards frantically slapped their bodies, but they still could not stop the black insect from entering their eyes, ears, nose, and even their skin. Asterisk dong dong. Asterisk after 2 dull explosions, the densely packed swarm of insects was blasted into pieces. 2 deep pits appeared in the middle of the black swarm of insects. The densely packed insect corpses and smelly black bug blood instantly filled the pits. These were the 2 wizards who knew that they were going to die and self-destructed. At this moment, the number of Alliance wizards in the lava hall had already reached 76. How could they just watch as this frightening swarm of insects continued to slaughter their companions? Powerful explosive fireballs, chain lightning, acid mist swamp, and ice spears were shot out one after another, smashing towards the swarm of insects with the force of a landslide. However, at the same time as the large number of insect corpses continuously fell, the bodies of the two Alliance wizards who were in the midst of killing the swarm of insects suddenly stiffened, and the explosive fireballs that they had condensed in the middle suddenly dispersed. Their heads also flew a few meters into the sky like a cannon salute, then rolled and fell far away. The places where their necks were severed were smooth, as if they had been directly cut by a swift and sharp blade. Under the watering of their blood that was like a fountain, a strange insect with a long and narrow body disappeared in a flash. It only appeared for a second before disappearing again. There's a magic insect. It can turn invisible. They're all rank 2. Many of the Alliance's wizards were in a frenzy. They hurriedly cast spells to protect themselves and tried to stand together with their companions. Unfortunately, most of the Alliance wizards were rank 1. Against a group of rank 2 magic insects that could turn invisible, they could only regrettably become the target of slaughter. Ah, ah, ah. Another mournful cry rang out. The 3 Alliance magi, who were standing back to back, had actually suffered a pincer attack from 5 Tier 2 void predators. Under the continuous slashes of the giant, scythe-like forelimbs, the shields of the 3 Alliance wizards were broken, and their bodies were chopped into pieces of different sizes and scattered on the ground. These 3 wizards belonged to the Kamara family, so they immediately incurred the wrath of the rank 3 wizard Yurga. With a strange hiss, the body of wizard Yurga, who was guarding the rear, exploded into a cloud of thick black smoke. The black smoke was like a living creature, and from the depths of the black smoke, a large flock of red-eyed ravens flew out, shrieking. Red-eyed ravens were low-grade magical creatures, and even some junior apprentices could easily deal with 1 or 2 of them. However, the large flock of red-eyed ravens that the rank 3 wizard Yurga had transformed into were mutants that had gone through multiple mutations. Apart from their 2 blood-red eyes, they also had a 3rd eye between their eyebrows. However, this 3rd eye was usually closed, so it was impossible to tell from its appearance. In the blink of an eye, the large flock of red-eyed ravens dove onto the battlefield, spreading out and letting out hoarse, ear-piercing screeches. The strange sound waves spread through the air like ripples, forcing out 5 void predators that were shuttling through the void layer. As soon as the 5 void predators appeared, the large flock of red-eyed ravens swarmed over and engaged them in a frenzy. Not to be outdone, the 5 void predators summoned a dozen or so demonic mantises, causing the battle to become even more chaotic and bloody. The flock of red-eyed ravens gathered in the void, reassembling into the appearance of the rank 3 wizard Yurga. His body was covered in black robes, and his face was filled with a sinister smile. He said coldly, "You dare to fight against my death ravens? Ha ha ha, I'll let you know where my name comes from." As an invisible mental wave was transmitted, the large flock of red-eyed ravens that were fighting the void predators and demonic mantises actually let out sharp screeches in unison. At the same time, a strange gray eye slowly opened between their black eyebrows and shot out a ray of death. If one red-eyed raven shot a death ray, thousands of red-eyed ravens would be able to shoot thousands of them. These gray rays shot randomly into the magical bug horde, with most of the level 2 void predators taking the brunt of the attack. A single death ray might not be that scary. After all, this kind of talent that allowed one to die almost instantaneously had to consider many factors, such as the difference in mental energy and magic resistance between the 2 parties. However, if an unlucky fellow was targeted by the death ravens, the probability of instant death from the death ray would stack. Bang, 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 like balloons that had burst one by one, the devil insect battle team, which had a large number just now, became sparse in an instant. More than half of the demonic mantises were instantly killed, while 2 of the 5 level 2 void predators were instantly killed. Death ravens. Death ravens. When the death ravens let out a piercing screech, it was also the moment of death. The bug wizard Bliss, who had been silently watching the battle from the hall on the first level of the wizard's pagoda, instantly spat out a mouthful of black blood, swaying on the spot. To be honest, with his current mental energy, it would be difficult to affect his state of mind and cause his origin to tremble, even if close to half of the bug horde were killed by the enemy. But as the death ravens killed the bug horde, the announcement of death, transmitted through the soul, brand hurt Bliss greatly. This meant that he, who was watching the battle from the back, was also affected by the death raven's talent. Damn it, damn it, damn it. After cursing with hatred, Bliss pursed his lips and let out an invisible sharp hiss. He immediately began to recall his insect army. Those damned blackbirds were the nemesis of his bug horde. Not only could they kill a large number of bug generals, they could also affect him, the mastermind behind the scenes. This was simply inconceivable. Immediately, the black bug horde that had been killing without fear on the battlefield began to retreat quickly. Even the void predators and demonic mantises ignored the death ravens, desperately escaping back into the wizard's pagoda. Chapter 784. This was the power of the laws. After witnessing the ferocity of the level 3 wizard Yurga, all the level 2 wizards could not help but sigh in their hearts. To be honest, this was not the true laws, only the tip of the iceberg. Otherwise, the Lich Blitz would have long since died under the terrifying law of instant death. How could he survive by sharing the damage? It could be seen that the level 3 wizard Yurga had only come into contact with a portion of the law of instant death and had incorporated it into his wizard spell attacks. Even though it was just the tip of the iceberg, it was already an irresistible killing move for most level 2 wizards. If not for the large swarm of insects sharing the damage for Blitz, and if Blitz's main body had been the one to bear the brunt of the death ray, this newly risen worm wizard might have died prematurely on his first flight test. It was an unlucky day for Blitz. It was supposed to be a perfect entrance, but it had only been arrogant for less than a minute before it was slapped in the face by the level 3 wizard opposite it. It could only flee, hiding in the wizard's pagoda, not daring to show its face again. From the short exchange just now, it could be seen that even though there was only a single level of difference between a level 3 wizard and a level 2 wizard, the massive difference in strength between the two was obvious. It was a complete one-sided suppression. A powerful rank 2 insect, which was a terrifying existence, to a rank 1 sorcerer. However, against a tier 3 sorcerer, he would be an easy target to crush. The difference in levels in the sorcerer world was almost impossible to overcome with experience and techniques. Although the insect witches were defeated, the arrogance of the sorcerers of the Alliance was also suppressed. Looking at the majestic tower that was damaged but still standing tall, all the level 1 wizards of the Alliance looked at each other, a little hesitant. Even though the rewards offered by a high-level wizard were tempting, it was not as valuable as their own lives. Who knew what other tricks the wizard's pagoda of the Crimson family had up their sleeves? If he were to stand out and attract another worm wizard, no one would dare take the risk to save him when he was in dire straits. Thus, the battle in front of the wizard's pagoda seemed to have cooled down. A bunch of cowards. Seeing this, Wizard Yurga let out a cold grunt, directly naming someone. Mucha, you will lead a team to attack the entrance of the wizard's pagoda. I can sense that the wizard's pagoda doesn't have much energy left. Mucha was a tier 2 sorcerer of the Kamara family and a capable subordinate personally nurtured by Yurga. At this critical moment, he could not overstep his authority and order the wizards of the other families to charge, so he could only let the wizards of his own family take the lead. Mucha was a robust, middle-aged man with a golden ring on his head. He had a bold face and an agile body. He acknowledged the order and led a few tier 1 sorcerers to the front of the battlefield. With the Kamara family's wizards taking the lead, the wizards of the other factions were no longer afraid, and they all charged toward the door of the wizard's pagoda. They knew in their hearts that if the Crimson family made any strange moves, even if it was for the sake of the family sorcerer, this rank 3 sorcerer would take action in time to resolve it. As the Alliance warriors retreated and the Alliance wizards moved forward, the battle at the door of the wizard's pagoda became more intense and bloody. The powerful wizard beasts that the Alliance wizards had driven forward bravely charged toward the door of the wizard's pagoda attacking the translucent energy field wall with all their might. Meanwhile, the crimson sorcerers within the door had to continuously clear out the many enemies gathered at the door in order to reduce the energy consumption of the wizard's pagoda. Wizard beasts, magical machinery, summoned beasts, pollution monsters, war golems, magical creatures from another world. These expendable wizard servants had replaced the wizards, becoming the new main characters on the front lines of the battlefield. On the other hand, the cautious magi hid behind the defensive line and attacked each other with colorful spells. On a battlefield like this, any wizard servant who performed too well would be able to apply for a pass to the abyss of death as they slaughtered their enemies. The war golems, for example, were made entirely out of special alloy. They were weapons that the alchemy sorcerers of the demonic forest hut had specially summoned to snatch credit. These war golems were killing machines that had been specially built for large-scale battles. They mostly maintained a humanoid shape, the surface of their bodies not having undergone any carvings or modifications, revealing a rough and wild base color of special alloy. The most eye-catching part of their tall bodies were the magical tattoo lines that were everywhere. These faintly discernible lines covered their entire bodies, appearing from time to time as powerful magical energy flowed through them. The war golem held a huge and exaggerated metal axe in its hand. The huge axe's surface was big enough to be used as the gate of any human city. Every move it made brought up a sharp gust of wind, reminding every living being around it to be careful and avoid it. The war golem's performance was so eye-catching and stunning the moment it appeared. One act for one, the war golem was like whack-a-mole. With a swing of its axe, a metal magical machine that was 3 to 4 meters tall was instantly turned into a thin metal pancake. It had only appeared for 3 minutes, and 5 magical machines from the Crimson family had already perished under its axe. If such a large creature was allowed to sweep across the battlefield, even the sturdiness of the wizard's pagoda would find it difficult to defend against the ferocious attacks of the giant axe in its hands. Thus, the assault team led by the draconian Zacha and the gnome Tygol charged out of the wizard's pagoda without hesitation, intercepting the war golem 30 meters away from the wizard's pagoda. The assault team was made up of level 1 crimson wizards and 20 remaining archer magical machines. They quickly spread out to create a space for the 2 level 2 wizards from the family. Meanwhile, the gnome Ripper controlled by the draconian Zacha and the gnome Tygol engaged in an intense battle with the war golem, whose abilities rivaled that of a level 2 wizard in front of the wizard's pagoda. The battle was intense and short. The war golem was completely destroyed in just a minute and a half. The war golem's broken body collapsed in front of the wizard's pagoda, trembling continuously as loud booms came from within it. All of the magical power spell formations and control spell formations exploded one after another. The war golem finally stopped moving, turning into a giant flaming man that continued to burn. The draconian Zacha and the gnome Ripper, who had obtained victory, had also paid a huge price for it. The draconian Zacha's body was covered in terrifying wounds left behind by the elemental wizard spells. Most of the scales on the surface of his body had already fallen off, and 2 of his 4 thick dragon legs were broken. He hung in the air, not daring to land on the ground. Every movement would cause him intense pain. His body was covered in wounds, and purplish-black blood flowed out of them, forming a small stream behind him. What was even more terrifying was that the wind essence armor on the draconian Zacha's upper body was already broken and twisted. There was also a terrifying fist-sized dent in the middle of his chest. If not for the double protection of the wind essence armor and the fire shield, the draconian Zacha might have already died under the heavy iron fists of the war golem. As for the other fighter, the goblin lacerator, he was already half dead. If not for the interference of the Wizards of the Alliance, with the cooperation of the draconian Zacha and Tygol, they should have been able to easily get rid of this war golem that was only suitable for sieging cities. However, in today's environment, under the threat of countless spells, they could only brace themselves and fight the war golem head-on. The Gnome Ripper, who was only 3 meters tall, was undoubtedly inferior to the war golem in terms of strength and vitality. Hence, it could only use its valiant attacks and nimble body to make up for the difference. In one breath, the Gnome Ripper had used up all the fire arrows in the Gnome Ripper's body. Only then did a fine crack appear on the war golem's chest. Then, the Gnome Ripper covered the draconian Zacha and rushed to the war golem's chest, using violent surges of thunder and lightning to envelop the area. The thickness of the war golem's armor had already exceeded the imagination of humans. It was extremely difficult to rely on ordinary physical attacks to take it down. However, once they pried open a crack that led to the space inside, the rest was easy. Fine thunder and lightning drilled into the crack, detonating the magical energy within. Only then did they successfully take down the war golem. The draconian Zacha, who was the main attacker, was undoubtedly the most severely injured. When he was dragged back into the wizard's pagoda by the Gnome Ripper, the forest demon Ava and Amelia, who rushed over to save him, could not be sure if he was dead or alive. Only 6 of the last 20 archer magic machines that had rushed out of the pagoda had returned. The rest had been left behind by the enemy. Even though Medusa and the Manticore Sharon had also rushed back, their injuries were no weaker than the draconian Zach's. They fell to the ground the moment they rushed into the wizard's pagoda, unable to get up again. The situation in front of the wizard's pagoda had suddenly become tense. If not for the 4 blood breeds charging out to massacre and intimidate the crowd, the situation on the battlefield might have been even worse. But even so, the hall on the first floor was filled with worry and many people were injured. Even the berserk witch Sophia, who came to help, had sustained serious injuries. She was barely holding on with one arm dangling in the air. The situation that had just been turned around due to the appearance of the worm wizards once again became pessimistic and heavy. At this moment, all the heavy burdens were firmly placed on Mary's body, to fight or to retreat. All of the wizards in the family were waiting for her decision. If she did not make a decision now, when the energy of the wizard's pagoda was depleted, would these wizards who had fought to the end for the family still have a chance to retreat? If the elites of the family were to die here, would there still be a need for the Crimson family to exist? The silence of the crowd, as well as the bloody massacre on the battlefield, tormented Mary's heart with every minute and second. It was undoubtedly very comfortable to be a leader when everything was going smoothly. But if she were to encounter such a critical juncture, where the lives of everyone depended on her decision, this formless heavy pressure was not something an ordinary person could easily endure. If Alice had lied to her, if Alice's reinforcements had arrived a step too late, if the wizards in the family could not withstand the pressure and collapsed prematurely, countless possibilities hovered in her mind, causing her to be deeply worried. However, she could only pretend to be calm and indifferent. There were countless moments when Mary would have an urge to rush out of the pagoda and kill without restraint. Even if she died in battle, it would be better than silently enduring the torment in her heart. Alice, just where are you? Chapter 785. The once solemn, blazing flame monarch was now trembling uncontrollably. A large area of damage had appeared on the tower. Some impatient Alliance wizards had already commanded their wizard beasts to rush in and start a street fight with the Crimson family wizards in the narrow area. The casualties on both sides began to rise. Even though the energy supply of the wizard's pagoda was running low, the secret wizard doors and magical traps within the wizard pagoda were still activated. The Magi of the Crimson family would undoubtedly have a great advantage if they were to roam and fight in such an area. If the battle was unfavorable, the Magi of the Crimson family could retreat at any time. Once the Alliance's sorcerers pursued them relentlessly, they could easily be lured into a trap and be surrounded and beaten up by multiple opponents. In the process of both sides roaming around, any area could become a battlefield for the Magi. How could the many structures within the wizard's pagoda withstand such a cruel wizard war? They all burned in the flames of war, crumbled and turned into ruins. With the continuous influx of magi from the Alliance, more and more places were turned into ruins, and the area for the Scarlet Magi to fight and roam was getting smaller and smaller. Relying on the bug wizard Bliss swarm of bugs and Mary's 4 blood tribe subordinates, the low-level wizards on the side of the Alliance did not dare push too far. Thus, they spent half a day before they managed to take down 2 levels of the Wizard's Pagoda. As the Wizard's Pagoda's teleportation formation was on the 4th level, they would lose their last chance to retreat if they took another step back. Thus, the Scarlet Wizard guarded the entrance to the 3rd level of the Wizard's Pagoda tightly, fending off the attacks of the enemy over and over again. Both sides suffered heavy losses. Even that old vampire, Hines, was no exception. Vic had tried to force his way through with his grade 3 strength, but he was forced to retreat by the 8 grade 2 warriors of the Crimson family. At this stage of the battle, the Scarlet Sorcerers knew in their hearts that if they took a step forward, they would live. If they took a step back, they would die. Hence, they gave up on those meaningless thoughts and used all their strength to drag the battle out. Later on, 2 Tier 3 players from the Alliance led a group of Tier 2 players and charged into the 4th floor. Seeing that it was difficult to stop them, Mary had no choice but to detonate a magic trap to hinder the enemy's progress. Only then did she retreat with the Crimson Magus, choosing to defend the 4th floor's entrance. At this point, the Alliance wizards were in no hurry to attack. They sent out a large number of sorcerers to attack the entrance of the 4th floor to pin down the Crimson Sorcerer. After that, he secretly sent a few elite magi to explore and excavate from the 1st floor, working hard to open up a path to the energy room of the 2nd floor. As long as he cut off the connection between the energy and the Wizard's Pagoda, the teleportation formation at the top level of the Wizard's Pagoda would naturally lose its effect. At that time, slowly dealing with these Scarlet Magi would be the best strategy to reduce their casualties. However, at this critical juncture, the teleportation room on the 4th floor of the Wizard Pagoda shone with white light, and the spatial ripples became more intense. A large teleportation door that was swaying opened with great difficulty. The Wizard Pagoda's energy was already low, and now it was being squeezed dry by the large teleportation gate. The elemental pool in the 2nd underground level's energy room was quickly emptied. As soon as the energy supply was cut off, the large portal immediately began to tremble violently. It looked like it was about to collapse. The hearts of the Scarlet Magi trembled. Amidst the great shock, an even greater spiritual wave suddenly exploded in their minds. B*** starred. B** starred. A bunch of B** stards. I came to help you fight the battle, but you B** stards even made me use the teleportation energy. I hate you. Following the explosion of this powerful spiritual wave, a strange energy was injected into the large teleportation gate from a faraway foreign world. Only then did it stabilize its shaky state, allowing it to regain its stability. With a sharp sound, the space within the teleportation gate seemed to be torn apart by a huge force. A strange metal puppet shot out thousands of energy rays of different colors from its body, causing the space crack to become bigger and bigger. Only then did it manage to crawl out of the crack with great difficulty. It was only when the metal puppet stood in front of the group with 2 dull thuds that the group realized that the incomer was more than 8 meters tall. Its metal shell was shockingly thick. Within its translucent chest cavity, a strange octopus-like brain floated in a thick yellow viscous liquid, staring fiercely at the group. Yes, even though this strange brain floating in the viscous liquid did not have eyes, it used its unique spiritual tentacles to spy on every wizard on the 4th level of the Wizard's Pagoda. He. I was wondering why that last Alice was so anxious. So you've already been beaten up so badly by the enemy. Oh my God, the lower levels have all been demolished by the enemy. Even the energy center has fallen into the hands of the enemy. You're really a bunch of trash. You're guarding the Wizard's Pagoda, yet you've been beaten up so badly by the enemy. This strange brain seemed to be able to ignore physical obstacles and wizard spells, penetrating through the floors and peering into every corner of the wizard's pagoda. It had just stepped into the flame monarch's throne, but it already had a clear understanding of the situation between itself and the enemy. You're that brain monster, Gazlervi. The other wizards had never seen Gazlervi's mutated appearance, but Mary had followed Grimm to conquer the Steel City and knew everything that had happened there. She recognized the other party based on the familiar spiritual ripples. To be honest, I'm not Gazlervi. I'm just one of his clone brains. That fool made his head too big, and he couldn't go anywhere. He had no choice, so he split out me and made me his incarnation. I roamed around and saved your lives in passing. The strange brain trapped in the chest of the metal puppet became more and more excited as it spoke, as if it despised the main body in every way. The many Scarlet Wizards consciously filtered out the other party's senseless ravings and self-talk, immediately capturing a keyword: save. This big brain is here to save us. The crowd could not help but have a hint of suspicion in their eyes. They could tell that the metal puppet that the big brain was in was a humanoid magical machine. Its armor was thick and tight, but they could not see the shadow of any magical muskets or magical cannons. Could it be that it's going to rely on its big brain to save us? As a clone of the brain monster, the small brain monster undoubtedly had an extremely powerful spiritual energy. Formless spiritual tentacles danced in the void, and any mind that was not protected by magic was naked in front of it. Everything that the other party was thinking could be easily captured by it. As a clone of a Grade 3 brain monster, a group of Grade 1 and 2 magi dared to question its ability. This was a huge insult. The small brain monster roared and released a spiritual shock, causing the magi to feel dizzy and almost faint. I don't care who you are. Big head, since Alice has invited you all the way here, hurry up and get on with your work. Do you want to watch the enemy tear the blazing flame monarch apart? Mary said unhappily. I've already said, I'm not big brain. I'm just one of its clone brains. My name is Gru. 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 The small brain monster roared angrily. Of course, it was still using the spiritual language. However, even though it was roaring, it did not relax its grip. Strands of strange colored energy rays shot out from the metal puppet's body, connecting itself to the entire teleportation formation and the open teleportation gate. In the next second, something that shocked the Crimson Magi happened. Waves of powerful magical energy gushed out of its body and continuously entered the teleportation formation and teleportation gate, easily supporting them. Some of the magical energy overflowed and flowed toward the central control hall along the energy system within the Wizard's Pagoda. It seemed like the other party wanted to take over the entire Wizard's Pagoda. Energy. What powerful energy! At this moment, not only were the Crimson Magi shocked, even the 2 level 3 Magi on the 3rd floor of the Wizard's Pagoda raised their heads, their deep gazes penetrating the thick and dense floors of the Wizard's Pagoda, landing on the metal puppet that the small brain monster was residing in. However, their gazes only stayed there for a second before they were blocked by a wizard barrier that was raised. Wizard barrier? Yurga and Hanus were stunned at the same time. They focused their senses once again and realized that the Wizard's Pagoda, which had been on the verge of death, had been revived by the injection of a strange energy. *M in it. Don't bother about the energy room at the bottom floor. Let's destroy the central crystal here first. Yurga roared angrily. *M in it. *M in it. We've all been tricked. This Wizard's Pagoda actually has a second energy source. Quick, quick, quick. We must destroy the central crystal before the Wizard's Pagoda's defense system is activated. Even Hanus could not help but be flustered. It was precisely because the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda's defense system had lost its energy source that they could boldly barge into the upper levels of the Wizard's Pagoda. If the Wizard's Pagoda's defense system was activated at this time, they who were alone in the Tiger's Den. Even the 2 level 3 Magi would have a headache just thinking about the power of the Wizard's Pagoda's defense system, much less ordinary level 1 and level 2 Magi. As for the other low-level Magi, there was no way they could resist the defense system. However, just as they were panicking, the upper levels of the Wizard's Pagoda seemed to have undergone a huge change, starting to rumble and tremble violently. Shortly after, the Alliance Magi gathered at the entrance of the passageway leading to the fourth level let out pitiful cries, then retreated like a flock of sheep being chased by a pack of tigers and wolves. "What's going on? Stand still." As the leader of the Magi, Yurga roared angrily, but his roar stopped halfway. He could see clearly with his eyes that a group of metal magical machinery armed with magical energy cannons had swarmed out of the fourth level of the Wizard's Pagoda, crazily chasing after the Alliance Magi. Chapter 786. The number of the magic weapon army that charged down from the fourth level of the Wizard's Pagoda was shocking. They advanced side by side, following the countless twists and turns of the corridors towards the Alliance wizards, launching a swift and violent charge. A few of the Alliance's wizards couldn't dodge in time, and their instantaneous spells landed on the metal torrent. Before they could see the result, they were riddled with holes by the metal barrage, and not a single part of them was left unscathed. Originally, with the defensive abilities of the wizards, the metal bullets that only had physical damage were of little threat to them. However, they could not withstand the barrage of attacks. The witchcraft shield that the wizards put up was directly destroyed, and then it was the turn of the Alliance wizards to explode. The charging magic weapon army did not care about the deaths of the Alliance wizards. Under the control of the mastermind, they quickly advanced toward the lower level of the Wizard's Pagoda. There were also some strange people among the Alliance wizards. They used the earth and rock transformation spell to pull up crisscross stone pillars, temporarily blocking the path of the magic weapon army. Only then did they hastily form a defensive formation in the hall on the third level. Even though the Alliance wizards that came this time did not belong to a family or faction, as wise and noble wizards, they still had the combat skills to cooperate in battle. Some body-honing wizards and blood wizards stood in front, roaring and preparing to defend against the impact. A large number of elemental wizards took out their wizard staffs and started chanting powerful spells loudly. As for the alchemy wizards from the demonic forest hut, they once again summoned groups of elemental creatures to fill the gap in the front line. Even though these creatures with low defensive abilities were not very useful, they could still be used to deplete the enemy's firepower. They did not give them too much time to prepare. After a dozen flicks of fingers, the wild and ferocious magic weapon army destroyed all the obstacles and charged into the wizard hall. In the next second, a blinding torrent of spells surged out from the hands of the Alliance's sorcerers, destroying the 27 magical machines that had charged into the Sorcerer Hall into pieces. But before the torrent of spells could subside, the next batch of magic weapon warriors charged in. The sorcerers of House Undull roared and transformed into blood-mouthed monsters with terrifying mouths. They twisted their fat bodies and collided with the magical machine warriors in front of them. Amidst the deafening roars, the metal shells of the magical machines at the front were deeply dented, with jagged and horrifying bite marks on them. On the other hand, Bloody Mouth, whose head was also bleeding from the collision, did not seem to care at all. It swung its fat fishtail and whipped away the magical machine that was in its way. Metal bullets rained down. Since the magical muskets and cannons held by the demonic warriors were powered by magical energy, they did not have the terrifying roar of the alchemy bombs. However, the rain of bullets was still as terrifying as ever. The witchcraft shields and elemental shields of the Alliance wizards at the front line were hit until sparks were flying everywhere. In the blink of an eye, the second round of attacks from the elemental wizards landed on the magic machines in the front row. The unbridled elemental torrent engulfed the metal magical machinery, twisting and damaging their terrifying metal shells beyond recognition. But the metal magical machinery did not seem to have any fear. Just as the ones at the front fell, the ones at the back took their place. No matter how many wizards were killed, the number of magical machines pouring out of the corridors did not decrease. The asterisk imminent. Just how many metal magical machines did the Crimson family have in reserve? The faces of all the Alliance wizards turned pale. Little did they know that at that moment, in the teleportation room on the 4th level of the Wizard's Pagoda, there was a large teleportation portal standing steadily. Every second, 4 to 5 magical machine warriors would walk out with heavy footsteps, then pounce toward the lower level of the Wizard's Pagoda under the command of the brain monster Jellu. The brain monster Gazlervi had given it his all to fulfill Alice's promise. Other than teleporting the brain monster to the flame monarch, even the magical furnace had come with Jellu. It was precisely because of the existence of the magical furnace that the teleportation formation had an endless supply of magical energy, bringing the entire magical weapon army to this battlefield of life and death. Even though the brain monster Jellu did not seem to care at that moment, to Gazlervi, today was definitely a day of pain and joy. It might feel good to use the magical weapon army to crush the enemy without restraint, but Gazlervi was squandering the energy reserves and magical equipment reserves that the Metal Fortress had accumulated over the years. As the metal magical machines died in batches at the front lines, Gazlervi, who was hiding in the faraway Lance dimension, was also bleeding madly in his heart. When the level 3 brain monster decided to use all the reserves it had accumulated over the years to smash people, those who stood in its path were destined to meet a bloody end. In the Wizard Hall on the 3rd level of the Flame Monarch, the battle between the magical weapon army and the Alliance wizards had reached its climax from the start, with a large number of casualties occurring at almost every moment. At the beginning of the battle, the wizards relied on their layered defense lines to block the metal magical machines in a corner of the hall, preventing them from successfully spreading out their formation and displaying their terrifying advantage in numbers. However, the metal magical machines were not stupid. With the brain monster Jellu commanding them, they also had a powerful warbrain. The magical machines at the front lines were blocked at the entrance of the corridor and could not break through, but the magical machines at the back did not just stand there and wait. Instead, they used their bodies as weapons and directly tore down some obstructing stone walls, forcibly opening up a few paths to attack. Taking advantage of the time when the Alliance wizards were busy mobilizing troops to block the path, a large number of magical machines rushed into the wizards' defense line without hesitation. The magical weapon army was not afraid of casualties anyway. Even if they used a dozen magical machines in exchange for a wizard's life, it was still worth it. The metal magical machines kept pouring in, and soon, they occupied a few corners of the wizard hall. The elemental wizards who had fallen behind and could easily chant large-scale spells were now forced to play hand-to-hand combat with these metal magical machines. They used instant spells and magic wands, and although they were also quickly slaughtering the magical machines, their killing speed was obviously much slower than before. At this time, the physique refinery wizards and bloodline wizards at the front lines of the battle also began to suffer casualties. The previously orderly situation of the battlefield was instantly in danger of being overturned. The two extremely furious level 3 wizards also rushed out. They each used their unique techniques and easily slaughtered the metal magical machines that rushed in front of them. The Tier 3 vampire, Heinz, moved like a ghost, his claws filled with crimson energy dancing in the air. With a single swipe of his claws, he tore through the chest of a metal magic tool and turned it into a mess. As for the level 3 wizard Yurga, he turned into a large flock of death crows, cawing as he shuttled through the middle of the densely packed magical machines. Poof, poof, poof. The gray death rays landed on the bodies of the magical machines like concentrated arrows. After the metal magical machines were dyed with a clear layer of gray, they suddenly fell to the ground, losing their sole connection with the brain monster Jellu. Damn it, damn it, damn it. These guys are not easy to deal with. The brain monster Jellu laughed coldly in front of the teleportation gate. He could not help but extend his mental energy toward the wizard's pagoda's control crystal. Even though the power of the magical machine core could flatten the enemies before him, they would definitely suffer heavy casualties. That was why Jellu placed his hopes on the defense system of the wizard's pagoda. With the help of the Wizard's Pagoda and the firepower of the Magical Machine Corps, there was hope of defeating this group of damned enemies in one fell swoop. Authority? Authority? I want authority. The brain monster, Jellu, waved his octopus tentacle-like brain stem and shouted loudly. Gargamel hesitated for a moment before finally stepping forward. He used his mental energy to communicate with the control crystal and began transferring his authority to the other party. After obtaining the authority of the Wizard's Pagoda, the brain monster Jellu laughed coldly and attacked the Wizards of the Alliance who were still fighting in the hall on the 3rd level. In the Wizard Hall on the 3rd level of the Wizard's Pagoda, the battle between the metal magical machines and the Wizards of the Alliance was still ongoing. Just as the two parties were locked in a fierce battle, waves of majestic magical energy quickly surged within the stone walls around the Wizard Hall, quickly lighting up one mysterious wizard formation after another. Such a secretive change might be able to fool the low-level wizards in the fierce battle, but it could not fool the 2 level 3 wizards who had their mental energy spread throughout the entire battlefield. Not good. The enemy has activated the defense system of the Wizard's Pagoda. This place is dangerous. Under the solemn gaze of Heinous and Yurga, mysterious and strange wizard formations appeared on the surface of the stone walls. Then, all the wizards present felt the elemental energy within their bodies stagnate, as if the close connection between them and the elemental particles had been cut off by some kind of protective force field. They could no longer use it as easily as they did at the front lines. Magic Disruption Barrier. The Wizards of the Alliance present were not rookies, and they instantly analyzed the effect of the Magic Disruption Barrier. Within the Wizard's Pagoda, other than fire element wizard spells that could be cast without any hindrance, all other wizard spells would be greatly disrupted. If the spell was light, the spell would fail, and if it was heavy, the spell might backfire. The appearance of the Magic Disruption Barrier also immediately affected the battle between the wizards. After all, there were only a few elemental wizards that belonged to the fire element. Most of the elemental wizards of other elements had their elemental shields flickering on the surface of their bodies before disappearing one after another. Without the protection of shields, the level 1 elemental wizards were just a bunch of pitiful worms with bodies that were slightly stronger than an average person. In an instant, the line of defense that had been able to hold on completely collapsed. The Wizard Alliance, which belonged to a few major factions, could no longer hold on. All of the wizards gathered around the high-level wizards of their respective families, frantically escaping out of the Wizard's Pagoda without looking back. Don't run. Let's gather and charge to the 4th level. As long as we destroy the enemy's teleportation formation, we still have a chance at victory. Yurga shouted with all his might. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.